Welcome to Worlds Unbound. Make sure to visit the story page on Royal Road to support the author, or to follow along. Link in the description. Video created with permission from author. First Contact. By Ralts Bloodthorne. Chapter 11. Help us, please help us. It killed everyone in our colony, killed most of my crew. It chased through jump space, Veckan said, opening the comm window on his own displayers, moving the task from the shattered screens in front of an empty seat that used to be the communications station. Your request for assistance is granted, came over the comm. The voice was calm and clear and cut through the background static like the sender was just outside the hull and not 12 million miles out. AM moving to intercept, the voice continued. You can't scratch that thing and it's trying to force you to head home so it can follow you. Naktidi looked at what few screens were working and saw that a ship rising out of the gas giant. The scanner was having a hard time holding onto it, the ship vanishing in a ball of fuzz or just plain disappearing from the screen. According to the ship's scanners, when it could see it, it was a dead ship, no energy output and a solid object with no hull spaces. Please help us. It slaughtered our colony, killed our friends and family, Veckan said, almost sobbing. That's what they do, the voice said. Now it wants you to go back home so it can follow you. But why? Veckan asked as Lektat accelerated toward the stranger in a corkscrew pattern. So it can kill them too, the voice answered. There was no emotion beneath the calm, just certainty and eerie dead calm. Get behind the gas giant. I'm sending you a friend. Listen to him and treat him well. Naktidi could see the speed the new ship was putting on, already up to point 25C and climbing. The terrifying ship behind them was changing course, heading for the newcomer, already up to point 15C and accelerating. Her poor suite could only pull a tenth of the acceleration those ships were showing, and it had the newest compensators, best drives, and most modern thrust tubes. Still, Lektat was making a good showing even with two of the engines not responding and one of the reactors offline. Dashin, in his disaster frame body, was locked into his pilot's pod, information pouring into his brain as he pushed the throttle to 60% and set his course at an angle. He knew it would make his drive signature burn through his stealth, but he didn't have a choice if he was going to give those poor souls any chance at escape. Fido, good boy. War boy time? Dashin wished he still had a mouth to wipe as he stared at the massive ship in front of him and tickled Fido's petting nerve. He was close enough and he wasn't about to try to bring down the range and let that big bastard get first launch on him. He ordered the warbois to flush the missile tubes and reload. Naktidi and Veckan saw on the long-range scanner what appeared to be glitter sparkle around the newcomer then vanish. What was that? Chekov asked. Nobody had an answer. No, Fido. Our new friends are hurt, and can't go home, Dax started. The big ship had seen him, picked him up already. No, Dax, no, Fido can be warboy again. Fido is good boy. New boy need Fido to be good boy. Dax fired the C+ cannons, one right after another, as fast as he could without risking warping his ship's frame, ordering the war boys to bring up hotshot for the C+ cannons. The crew of the suite felt as if someone was plucking at their bone marrow like it was ghostly guitar strings. 4 deep vibrations that seemed to come from deep inside. Dax need Fido. I need you to help them. Get them to confeed space. Naktidi saw that the massive ship, which was now passing her little ship, suddenly rolled, ponderously because of its size, but rolled all the same. Dax need Fido. They need you more, buddy. Dax saw the cannon shells hit first. The size of an old train car, solid iron, more often used as auxiliary fuel sources than actual shells. They were moving at point 995C when they hit the armor of the Leviathan now hurtling toward him. All they left was deep craters, adding to the craters from battles past that the behemoth had survived. New boys need Fido? Yes, Fido, take them to confeed. Silent running, Chekova said suddenly. He sounded resigned. If it will matter. The missiles Dax had fired before dropped stealth, blowing free their shielding, deploying the submunitions. The submunitions spread out, orienting, and triggered. Graviton generators spun up, creating gravity lances, focusing the nuclear explosion into a lance of energy. Dozens of beams stabbed into the behemoth's armor, raking it, gouging at it with talons. Making nothing but pockmarks. I can't beat him, Fido. Fido, help. Dax felt his point defense to rapid fire, heard the VIs telling him each time a missile was wiped away, each torpedo that was destroyed. His point defense, the best money could buy from gray market dealers, driven by the best VIs outside the Confederate Navy, wiped away all of the incoming missiles and torpedoes. But Dax could tell it had been close. Help new boys, Fido, help new boys. Fido, help new boys. Dax triggered the ejection for Fido's frame, timing it with another missile launch and firing off the C+ cannons at the same time. It wasn't much, but Dax hoped it was enough to hide Fido's launch in the background clutter of another attack. Fido loved Dax. And he was gone. Dax loved Fido, he thought the empty spot that had been Fido for eons. He concentrated on the battle at hand. Dax knew he couldn't stop it, knew he couldn't kill it, but he could hurt it. Wound it. Slow it down. Maybe that will be enough. The crew of the suite felt that ghostly plucking at their bones again. Naktidi and Vekins saw the glitter again. They watched as the newcomer's ship rolled, obvious intending on making a broadside-to-broadside attack run. They watched the two other ships dance. The newcomer smaller, more agile than its opponent, moving in to fire close-range weapons, fading back to use longer-range ones, always where the opponent's weapons didn't strike. The newcomer deployed decoys and vanished, fired off jammers and strobing pulses of energy designed to confuse and blind sensors, always moving to get behind the larger foe. Both of the combatants were massive compared to the suite, but they moved like smaller ships. Lektat stealthily moved the suite further and further away, trying to avoid the attention of either of the two ships. Acceleration on the big one's dropping. I can't be positive, but I think our friend hit something, Vekins said softly. Finally, Naktidi breathed. The fight had been going on for almost 2 hours and all 4 of her hands ached from squeezing the arms of her crash couch. We might have a problem of our own, Shakova said quietly. Naktidi frowned at him and he tapped one of his active display boards. I've got some motion sensors reporting movement. I don't have many left. Most of the systems are still down, but twice I've had a crew member report that something was moving on the other side of a wall. Something heading this way, Shakova said. The reminder that some of her crew was still alive was a cold comfort to Naktidi at the idea of something launched by that horrific ship boarding her poor wounded suite. The armory, she started to suggest. Gone. Same with security, Shakova said. Where is it? Naktidi asked. Hang on. Shakova pressed one hand to his ear, listening to another crew member. He looked up, his eyes wide with fear. Taltek saw it. He's only a few decks away. He said it's a large 4-legged robot. And it's heading our way. Naktidi opened her mouth to reply when a news signal appeared on her display. Fido, good boy. Fido, sorry not asked to come in. Fido, help new boy. Dax say Fido take new boy to confeed. Sneaky time. Fido love Dax. Naktidi looked up. Does anyone know what a Fido is? The crew shook their head. Fido help new boy. Captain, that Fido thing is asking me to let it steer. It's showing me a jump space coordinate. Lektat said, still staring at his panels. Tell it the front of the hull is open to space and we're stuck in here. Naktidi said, fighting the urge to just go limp and let the universe just finally kill her. Lektat nodded, tapping on his display. It felt weird that the only thing Naktidi could hear was her own breathing, her ship groan around her, and the radio. She felt like she should be able to hear more. Anything more. Just more. Jump, jump, jump. That was all the warning Naktidi got. The ship shuddered as the jump engines fired up and the jump core dumped all its power into the drives. Several intact screens exploded as they overloaded, the lights brightened, then dimmed. And they were in jump space. The colors whirling, tastes dancing on Naktidi's tongue, metallic plinking coming to her ears, and the smell of a warm summer day flooding her nasal cavity. Then they were out. Out of habit, Naktidi glanced at her screen, looking for a reading on how close they were to the boundary, what kind of star they had come out to, how many planets were nearby. Instead, there was nothing. Just empty space with stars in the distance. Wound lick. Fido help. Fido miss Dax. Chapter 12 Dashin. Dax could feel his face pulled up in a death's head grimace/smile as he kicked the port over burners on and pulled a turn with enough force that his entire ship groaned around him. He popped flares on his port side, letting the plasma-charged dazzlers spread out in an arc from his port side as he deployed one of his last high-EM decoys out his starboard side and threw 2 whispered decoys from the top and bottom. As soon as he would appear to be halfway through the turn, he cut his engines and dropped all his reactors but the zero-point reactors. The trick worked. The Leviathan's missiles went off as the plasma flares dazzled their onboard VIs. The 2 Hell cannon shots obliterated the high-signal drone, and the rest of the Leviathan's munitions spent their fire and fury on the quieter drones. Hell beams scorched the space where Dax would have been if he'd kept making the curve. Old, but just as smart and canny as the newer ones were. Maybe smarter, Dax thought to himself. He reached out to tickle Fido's petting nerve, a nervous habit he'd developed over the eons, and just found emptiness. The rage almost choking him thickened. Wrath filled his non-existent limbs and made his missing heart hammer in his chest. I just wanted left alone. He screamed at the Leviathan, the scream never leaving his organics. The Leviathan was probing for him, trying to find him, going into an evasive pattern as best the craft the size of Australia could manage. Dax's computers had gamed that evasive pattern as the one with the highest probability, and the 6 who had come up with it danced and capered as it was allocated more RAM for decision-making. The creation engine was working overtime, pulling down his noble gases that he'd siphoned from the gas giant and compressed until they were metals, converting them to matter and that matter into weapon munitions, repair parts, armor to replace what had been blasted away. It had reached the point where it wasn't able to create nanites as fast as the strain of overwork was destroying them. The bottom of the creation engine was filled with a layer of slush that was composed of nothing but dead nanites. There. His weapon bays were reloaded, stocks reloaded, the rest would have to wait. The creation engine was stuttering now. The Leviathan had turned to face away from Dax, presenting the rear of the massive ship, the thrusters that were the size of some cities. Dax threw it in maintenance mode to clean it, used the zero-point reactors to jump-start the other reactors, locked down his disaster frame, and punched the engines to red line. He jumped from point 34C to point 65C in less than 60 seconds, just like the sleazy AI in the DAS Black Market EVR showroom had promised. Dax had the feeling of his face being pushed back, squeezed by a giant fist, and his lips flapping with the acceleration. I wonder whatever happened to my face, Dax thought. His subconscious was running overtime, helping the supercomputers with their computation by providing chaos and randomization strings, which caused odd thoughts at odd times. The price one pays. Dax had known the big bastard was trying to sucker him, so the sudden slow twisting flip and the Leviathan firing off all its weapons at once came as no surprise. Hellbeams, plasma missiles, laser heads, NCV shells, and more raked at him. Dax saw 1-6 jumping up and down, trying to get attention, but the others were saying he was slow and stupid and wrong. The 6 was claiming there was a main gun battery that was going to be fired into the corkscrew arc Dax was taking for a white-knuckle run along the more cratered side of the Leviathan. The other VIs said it was stupid and the main batteries hadn't fired in the last 3 times they had a shot, so Dax's near hit must have disabled them. A memory of a biological artificial sentient plasma blast hitting the APC he was in on Rigel 6 suddenly flickered through his mind in an electronic tick of time. Dax hadn't survived every war since the first Digital Sapience War by going with what everyone said all the time. He'd learned to trust his instincts, and his subconscious agreed with the 6. The ship screeched in pain as metal overstressed, a hyperalloy strut cracked with a bang. But Dax reversed his spin, going from clockwise to counterclockwise through the corkscrew. The Leviathan's main batteries tore open jump space, ripped through it, becoming wrapped in a band of hyperparticles that made up jump space, then exited back into real space where Dax would have been if he hadn't pulled the reverse. Real space exploded, the very fabric of space-time inverting for a split second before returning, dark matter coalescing and boiling away. Jump space boiling, tears and ripples visible to the naked eye for a heartbeat as fire boiled out of the tear and shadowy talons reached for where Dax would have been. Even a miss by nearly 200 kilometers boiled all the ablative armor off of the side of Dax's ship, destroyed the last of his reactive armor on that side, stunned the repair boss 6, and killed a half-dozen Warba VIs. Dax didn't have very many hashes left that he hadn't used already. Reusing an old one gave the enemy a chance to figure out their algorithm the same way they could predict a human mind that wasn't outfitted with a chaos seed generator, and Dax had no desire to let the Leviathan begin predicting his actions. One of the VIs suggested that Dax use a handful of fission weapons on the Leviathan, crater its armor more. Another suggested a fusion beam at the big central engine, and another one suggested that Dax dress up in a costume and dance the flamingo to escape the wolves that were after him. Dax went to emergency evasion, rotating the ship and firing the engines at overburn as he rotated his ship according to the dance instructions. Secondary batteries lashed all around him. His ship took 3 hits, but none penetrated the armor. His shields held against the attempt to shred his computer systems, and his personal shielding built into his disaster frame kept the secondary attack against his computer systems from attacking his very brain. The fission missiles launched got through the Leviathan's defenses and exploded inside one of the massive engine thrusters, blowing through the side of the thruster, venting the energy into the spaces beside it, and pushing the thruster nozzle to the side. The Leviathan cut the engine but used the energy to pull around in a turn. Its acceleration dropped noticeably. Still the fight raged on, Dax getting close then backing off, cycling through weapons in a random pattern, constantly looking for any edge. He learned not to get too close when his upper thought processes suddenly shut off. Even the VIs went still, frozen in mid-caper and giggle and gibber and scamper. The firmware embedded in Dax's R-complex went live, realized it was in charge of a ship, and took heavy evasive action, getting the ship away from the huge predator as fast as possible. The Cake's generator embedded in Dax's still working subconscious started throwing out random strings to help the boy while Dax's firmware ordered a hard reboot. In the 3 seconds Dax's brain was frozen, both his decoys were destroyed, but the boy got him out, got him through it, even as it gibbered in panic and fled for its life. "I want left alone" was the first thought that came to Dax when his higher brain functions rebooted. Old and mean, Dax corrected himself. He ordered the VIs to load the C+ cannons with warshot. No hypershot, no dead shot, but full-blown warshot. They were illegal in Confed space, illegal to own and manufacture. Loading small hyperspace engines into the train car-sized slug, iron over lead with a xenon core. Dax deployed his last 2 running mate-tethered drones, loaded up with missiles and a plasma wave phased motion gun on each. Jump, jump, jump. Hearing Fido faintly tell him goodbye, not through the radio, not through the comms, but through some shared link they'd created over the eons that had no scientific basis for its existence, Dax was resolved to give his companion every edge he could. He dumped his mags. Missiles spat from tubes all down the sides of his ship. Torpedoes fired from the forward and rear bays. Antimatter beams lanced out, lasers glittered in the darkness, and more. Dax sent a brace of disruptor beams to where the jump wake would be. Dax returned fire with the C+ cannon, going from just heaving train cars at the Leviathan to true C+ slugs. The rotating barrels fired, thumped, then started jamming up. Cannon 2 and 4 broke rotator chains, Cannon 1 shredded a track, Cannon 3 blew a recoil buffer. His 2 running mate drones spit out all the missiles, fired the plasma wave phase motion guns, then reconfigured themselves into smart torpedoes and started their runs. Main strut 4 howled as it twisted. Strut 19A snapped. Deck 15A2 buckled. Nanite slush tank 2 ruptured and spilled H2O slush into space. Dax fired up the creation engine, ignoring the warning that it was still 18% slush and at 60% heat. He ordered the VIs to get in there, get on the damage to the internal structures, fix the C+ cannons and the 3 jammed missile banks. With a grimacing excuse for a smile, Dax knew Fido had gotten away as he dropped his speed and jetted for the nearby asteroid belt. He knew that the Leviathan would chase him, not Fido, in order to get rid of the vessel that could actually hurt it, damage it, sting at it. The C+ warshot hit first. The micro-engines flickering them in and out of the lower hyperspace bands, changing direction as the internal guidance warp yammered at them too. Barely in real space for a second before the micro-engine threw it into the bands to load to be of real use, but still moving the light C+ cannon slugs at 5C. The missile came out of hyperspace both in and not in Leviathan, most of the slug nothing more than the crazed physics particles that inhabited the border between real space and hyperspace, and the hyperspace bands. Not the more calm particles of the higher bands, but the ravening half-mad particles of where 2 incompatible universes rubbed against each other, screaming at each other over the speed of light. The giant Leviathan actually staggered, 2 engines flickering and going out, one jetting out a huge plume of energized particles before going dark. The light-speed weapons hit, carving into the bottom of old craters, fingers pressing into old wounds and scars, searching for a weak point. Armor blasted away, craters deepened, and finally internal spaces were breached. One of the plasma wave phase motion gun blasts hit the main battery of the Leviathan, the explosion from the plasma that contained more than its share of subspace foam-charged particles, detonated with a flash like a dying star, twisting and warping the batteries. "You shall be consumed" roared into every stray electron trace on Dax's ship. Half the VIs, most of the older ones, who were now nearly 3 hours old, were killed outright by the roar. The younger ones shrieked and babbled back, some filled with rage and bellowing out their wrath and desire to inflict pain. Those Dax slid into the weapons. "All of you assholes say that," Dax thought to himself. The missiles deployed their submunitions and went off, the torpedoes went in on ballistic trajectories, but the mechanical triggers held, going off and driving nuclear-shaped charges into the armor. One hit an old crater, some relic of a forgotten battle on a star system that was now barren wasteland, that some poor bastard had paid deeply to inflict. The lance of the shaped charge drove deep into the Leviathan's flank, tearing through maintenance spaces, and into an open space the size of a metropolis. In the split second before the secondary buster charge went off, it relayed what it saw back home with malevolent glee at the fact it got to blow all that stuff up. Dax realized what the huge space contained at a glance. What was packed into the space, making it nearly a solid mass of interlocked machinery. He'd seen them before on dying worlds. Locust-class precursor replicators, each the size of a space station. "Can't stop you, can't kill you, but I can wound you," Dax spat in the foe's direction, physically firing more missiles. "Can't let you get to inhabited space easily." The disruptor beams passed through Fido's jump wake, destroying and twisting the traces, preventing anyone from figuring out where it had gone. Dax felt like hell. His left eye was swollen shut, a couple ribs cracked, 2 broken, his knuckles bruised and a couple bones in his hands broken. One ear was gone, the other burning and throbbing. He felt himself spit out broken teeth and felt the blood flow down his face from a bloody nose and split lips. His ship was badly damaged. Consumes started to be bellowed out. Dax fired off EM flares and dazzlers. The strobing hash of electromagnetic energy and graviton pulses matched with dark matter pulses interrupted the Leviathan's screech of rage. He was into the asteroid field. It wasn't like it was depicted in so many vids, more debris scattered across entire light minutes, the larger ones thousands of kilometers apart than a densely packed field of rubble. Still, it had what Dax needed. His debris shield flared wildly as Dax hit an asteroid twice his size. It wasn't solid, more a collection of rubble and dust that had gathered together over the millions of years. If it wasn't for the fact that Dax was moving at nearly 0.5 c, the asteroid would have come apart like a soft muffin. Instead, it was obliterated by the shields, the kinetic energy of its impact dumped into Dax's energy reserves. He dumped his drive cores to add to the flare and fired off a pair of dazzlers on short life high intensity. He cut his engines, shut down everything but two zero-point reactions, the warbois, the toolbois, and the creation engine. The creation engine slowly cooled, recycling the dead nanites, making up the slush and reclaiming what pseudomatter was left in the slush. From the outside, Dax's ship looked like a chunk of metal-heavy debris. Dead on the stick. The Leviathan slowed and started scanning where it had detected the massive energy flare, the debris field from the flare spreading out. It didn't compute that the small annoying ship had been destroyed. It was capable of withstanding a direct hit from its main guns and had proved too tenacious and full of tricks. There is only enough for one, it screamed. It knew that the smaller craft was in there. It would find it. It would devour it. Then there would be only one. I just want left alone. Chapter 13. Naktidi. Naktidi sighed as she sat down in the chair that had been bolted to the floor. The room had previously been an ammunition locker for plasma cannons, but one of the lances of energy fired by that terrible behemoth had sliced right through it. Now it was a meeting room and a place to eat and drink, to be outside a vac suit and breathe air without the hissing of a suit's oxygen. Lektat lifted a cup of warm water to her in a silent salute. The pilot/navigator was looking much better now that he was not in his vac suit watching over the mysterious Fido. Fido, who had not only boarded their ship during a terrible battle, turned out to be friendly, and gotten them away from the battle, but was now busily repairing the ship with the help of the suite's surviving crew. "What do you think of our guest?" Naktidi asked the only other Tavaru in what Fido had named the mess hall when he had finished making it. Why it was called a hall when it was a chamber, and why it was for messes when the little robot Fido left behind kept it so clean was a mystery to Naktidi. One of a million mysteries surrounding their guest. "I'm grateful to it for saving us, but it scares me to my core," Lektat said, sipping his warm water. He sighed in pleasure. "Why?" Naktidi asked. Lektat waved his hand at the mess hall and smiled. "This Fido is a robot, as far as we can tell anyway, since to any handheld scanner he's a solid mass with no moving parts, just a lump of some kind of alloy. He is overly careful of our feelings, constantly reassuring us that he's a good young male, but a couple of times he's mentioned not being a warble, which makes me worried." Naktidi nodded. "That's what bothers you, isn't it?" Lektat made his race's equivalent of a shrug. "We have an alien robot on board our already damaged ship. It's making repairs everywhere. Did you know it had 3 smaller robots that it calls Furbois? He says they're kitty and they help him do repairs. You think they're a problem?" Naktidi asked. "I've seen the kitty Furbois." She made a noise of contemplation, squeezing 2 of her hands together while she drummed her fingers of another hand and held the cup of warm water in the fourth. "Have you noticed how the Furbois react to us? You mean how they rub on you and make that purring sound? How they want you to stroke them even though they're robots?" Lektat said. Naktidi nodded and Lektat nodded and smiled. "Strangely enough, stroking them seems to really calm me." Whenever I'm really agitated, one seems to show up to rub on my legs until I stroke its robotic chassis. That purring is pleasing, it uses a subharmonic that soothes me. Naktidi sipped at her warm water, then spoke again. So, what else bothers you? Lektat pointed aft, toward the jump drive. I ran a diagnostic on the jump drive system. Core, tubes, engines, compression chamber, all of it. And? We were outfitted with the best that is available to non-military, no expense spared, correct? Lektat asked. When Naktidi nodded, he continued. Then why is everything operating way outside of specifications? When we jumped, we severely damaged the entire system, but not only has Fido repaired it, he has it working at levels that are outrageous. Either there's a serious error somewhere in the diagnostic software, or our new friend is more familiar with jump drives than even scientists on the Unified Science Council. Hlingkit stepped in, slowly moving over to the food and water dispenser. Lektat and Naktidi politely stopped their conversation, waiting for their crewmate to join them. She was the last of the medical personnel, surviving only because she had been asleep in her bunk. Laughing Chance had trapped her in her bunk in a room with air slowly getting more and more stale. Fido had rescued her. The kitty finding her before her air ran out. Discussing our new guests? Hlingkit asked, sitting down with a tray of food and a glass of warm water. Both nodded and she snorted. I'm thankful for him and his furbois, but I wonder slightly just what's going to happen to us. He is insistent that we do not return home yet, that we go to whatever Confeed is, Naktidi said. One of the furbois came through the door. Literally through the door, like the alloy panel was somehow just extruding it somehow. It pulled free with a little pop and wandered through the mess hall, making a noise that sounded like meow and was somehow plaintive, slightly whining, and demanding, all at the same time. The door was unmarred. There one is, Naktidi said. 3 or more of us relaxing and it wanders in. All 3 of the Tavara's wrist communicator/datapads buzzed at the same time. A glance showed the same message on all 3. Kitty, pet Mimi. The furboy, a cat's brain in a tank of Nutrigel augmented with high-end firmware, checked the crew's pulse, respiration, blood oxy, and everything else their wristbands tracked in order to see who was the most stressed of the 3. Knocky pet kitty appeared on Naktidi's wristband as the furboy jumped up on the table. It was used for damage control, rescues, and emergency services. Its natural tendencies were enhanced, uprated, and put to use. Dashin kept at least 3 with him at all times. He'd loaded them into Fido's disaster frame almost out of habit. Stress calming and medical diagnostic were part of Kitty 001A's biological makeup. As soon as Naktidi started petting the alloy frame of the small robot, it began giving out a rumbling purr full of subsonics that relaxed Naktidi's muscles and made her feel more calm. It was pleasingly warm to the touch, the alloy surface of the little robot almost like a touchstone to stroke and caress and ease one's emotions. The kitty flashed a symbol on the data display at the front of its head. Smiley face. Naktidi pulled her attention back to the conversation. So Fido is fixing and reprogramming everything on the ship. These little guys help him and monitor us. She nodded at Lektat. I can see your concerns, but our choices were this or that giant ship killing us with the rest of our crew and our families. I understand that, Captain, but you're not an engineer or a pilot. You don't understand just how big these changes are. He fluffed in agitation, and the kitty looked at him and meowed. He smiled, reaching forward and scratching the kitty's face display. How fast could our drives carry us? She thought for a moment, still petting the kitty's alloy chassis. If I'm correct, just over 500 C in normal jump space, she answered. Guess what the diagnostics and astrogation programs say we can reach now? Lektat said. Naktidi made the equivalent of a shrug. 600 C? Lektat made a noise of amusement. Try just over 20,000 C. Hlingkit almost dropped her water in shock. Naktidi choked on her sip. That was nearly 2.4 light-years per hour in jump space. And Fido says he's sorry, the jump drive is too old to make it go faster, Lektat said. The kitty moved over to Hlenket, rubbing around her ankles before jumping up in her lap. Hlenket didn't even look down, just started rubbing the robot's alloy chassis with her 2 gripping hands. Naktidi inhaled deeply, then exhaled sharply to get her 2 companions' attention. I think we need to have a bridge crew meeting, she said. She tapped a few icons to summon her reformed bridge crew. Hlenket, you are welcome to stay and join the meeting. Hlenket nodded, still petting the kitty. They sat in silence for a few moments, as one by one the rest joined the trio in the mess hall. The kitty went to each person, spending additional time on Chekova as the main damage control officer came into the mess hall and sat down. Hlenket clenched her gripping hands together to stay calm when she saw that the kitty had again recommended metal implants or vat-grown clone tissue to replace Chekova's missing arms, as if the ship had that kind of capacity. The ability to do that was limited to larger, more expensive hospitals, but the kitty seemed to expect for Hlenket to just wave her catching arms and summon up the replacement limbs out of thin air. Once everyone was seated, Naktidi looked at everyone. Chekova with his 2 missing arms, Ulimanti with her missing leg, Selkaman with most of the fur on his left side replaced by artificial skin grafts. Lektat with his fur silver around his eyes. Vekin with his haunted expression. Laminati, who had been trapped inside one of the point defense stations, only his hand crushed into the console keeping him from being sucked out into the void or into jump space, watching his suit slowly evaporate every jump. Naktidi wanted to close her eyes, wish really hard, and have the world be back to normal when she opened them. She wrapped her 2 catching hands on the table, bringing everyone's attention to her. The kitty was still whining around everyone's feet, purring as it rubbed against their ankles and shins. Our guest has informed us that the jump drive is ready to go and head toward the coordinates he has locked in, Naktidi said. Our destination point is... She consulted her data pad. 1106 light-years away. That got groans. At the speed of the old jump drive, it would take just over 2 years to reach the destination. Our guest stripped most of the recreational facilities we had left for scrap so he could perform repairs, Laminati said. He held up a catching hand. Not that I'm complaining. I'm grateful to our guest. The kitty jumped up onto his lap and he laughed, petting it. And to you too, kitty. It was a kitty who had found him, hanging in the void, the tips of his boots kissed and licked by the jump shield. It won't take that long, Lektat said. He tapped the bottom of his half-full plastic glass on the table. Our new friend tuned and repaired our drive, to use his words. How long will it take us? Hlenket asked, thinking over how she'd help everyone mitigate their stress. She suddenly remembered what Lektat had said. Oh. The drive. Lektat nodded. Grasp the table, friends, he warned. Everyone present grabbed the edge of the table with their gripping hands, Chekova lifting his severed arm then lowering it with a grimace. He looked at them all. According to our drive diagnostics and astrogation software, it will take us 19.7 days without using what Fido has labeled as jump streams, and if we use those it will take us 6.3 days. That got exclamations of shock and disbelief. Once you hit those speeds in jump space, the ship just dissolves away, was one protest. We'll all be smeared across jump space, screaming for eternity, was another. How do you know we'll go that fast? Was the biggest third. Naktidi rapped on the table with her catching hands, getting attention. She had to admit, she was still holding tight to the table. And you can't chase another ship in jump space, and flames can't exist in space, and sound doesn't carry in vacuum, Naktidi said. However, does anyone really find something as simple as jump space mechanics that shocking compared to what our pilot has just revealed? Half of them turned to Ulimanti with questions in their eyes. The young Tvara had been the top of her class in astrogation and navigation. Naktidi had moved Lektat to pilot after his impressive showing during the battle and promoted Ulamanti to navigator. Ulamanti shook her head. The math checks out. I ran the formulae Fido provided, did all the math, once even doing it by hand on strips of plas, and it all checks out. That second shift formulae that he called high jump is. She trailed off for a second, then shook her head. It's blindingly obvious once you see it. I mean, I saw it, and I instantly wondered why I had never seen it or even thought about it. It's such a basic, such a simple formula. If the formula an alien robot gave you is real, Selkerman said, I want it to be real. He gave a wry movement with his ears. But our luck hasn't been good lately. We're still alive, Naktidi argued. I had every crew member familiar with jump space mathematics look at the two critical formula, and every one of them repeated what Ulamanti said. How did we not see this before? Even I myself, someone who is known to have missed a branch or two I have jumped for, couldn't believe how obvious it was, Hlengket said, smiling. That got nods. So much of the formulas, from alloy creation to circuit design to energy flow, was so simple, so glaringly obvious once they had seen it, it had been almost humiliating. The jump drive tuning was so basic and simple that Toltec, a jump drive tech with decades of experience, had screeched with rage for nearly a full minute. He had ranted against idiot instructors who said such formula were wrong, ranted against years of his life wasted in jump space. After that he had not only stopped protesting against modifications to the hardware and software of the jump drive, he had actively helped Fido make modifications. So we can head home? Ulamanti asked, looking down at her severed leg. I would so much like to visit a medical center. Naktidi shook her head. That thing might still be out there. Fido didn't think his friend Dashin would be able to stop that monster. Which means it's still out there. But you can't follow someone. Selkerman started and then looked down, flattening his ears in embarrassment. In jump space, Lektat finished. I agree with the captain. We can't go back. He gave a laugh. Fido says he's taking us to his home, to meet others like that Dashin. They said that they can help. We need help. I need help, Hlengket said. My medical bay consists of what Fido could help me rig up and what I could scavenge from various medical kits that survived the battle. Are we sure we? Selkerman started, then looked down again. If he was going to kill us, he would have done it days ago. Exactly. We don't really have a choice, Naktidi said. I'm worried, to be honest, Selkerman said, looking up. He tapped the Sinskin graphs with his catching hands. What kind of people are Fido's people? How do we know they will help us? Look at what we saw from this Dashin ship. We could barely see the battle, we couldn't track his missiles, we could barely keep a hold on him. If he's typical of his people, what does that mean for us? We're weaker than they are. Yet he not only came to our aid, Lektat said softly. He reached out and touched the kitty, running one finger up and down what it called its tummy. This Dashin sent us 4 of his friends to help us escape a battle we had no chance of winning. Selflessness and charity are one of the cardinal civilized virtues, Hlengket said. I say we do it. The vote was taken, and to Naktidi's surprise it was passed without a single dissenting vote. Not even on the catching hands. It's agreed, Naktidi. Let Fido know we want to leave as soon as possible. 2 mid-cycles, 10 of Fido's days, each, and the ship smelled of stale body odor, stressed alloys, and strangely, of fresh-cut green things, a side effect of what Fido called high jump when the taste suite went from normal jump space speeds to ludicrous speeds. They couldn't use the jump streams, since the ship's structure picked up a grinding, shuddering harmonic within an hour of hitting that high-energy stream of space that the Unified Science Council had always insisted would make ship that so much as grazed it explode. Fido was sitting on the bridge, his strong legs locked into the bulkhead, the kitties hidden within his robotic body. Fido had whined when he realized that Nectiti planned on dropping from jump space to real space without everyone in their vac suits. Remembering last time, she'd ordered everyone aboard into their armored versions and overridden any objections with loud vocalizations high-pitched enough to hurt the ear. The bridge looked like they were going to war. The ship's weapons ready but not loaded or fully energized, simply ready to bring into action at a moment's notice. Shields, what few they still had left beyond the debris shields, were ready to snap up to replace the jump shields the minute they entered real space. To the crew it felt like battle stations going into a war. It surprisingly made them feel less anxious. The swirling colors vanished, replaced with a gut-wrenching crack with real space. Again Nectiti noticed the difference in dropping down using Fido's computations. To her it only proved that Fido had formula for the computations that her own people did not, and was able to account for some energy, or movement, or something that Nectiti's people didn't even know of. The main view screen, cobbled together out of a dozen entertainment screens from empty berths, came back to life, showing not only stars but a burning yellow star in the distance. Home, home, home. Cuddle, cuddle, cuddle. Scans coming back in 3, 2, 1. Veckan said. Drive nominal, real space controls steady, Lektat said. The grav generator had been repaired, bringing back artificial gravity, but Nectiti could swear she felt the ship shift slightly. We're getting a comm request and a computer link request, Selkerman said. Fido Freeborn Good Boy 437 KL 6365 F1D0 appeared on Selkerman's monitor. Let it through. Let the Omni translator handle anything, Nectiti said. Let's see if Fido's linguistics pack and lexicons are good. Coming through now, Selkerman said softly. Can you see the broadcaster? Nectiti asked. Veckan shook his head. Just a jump space buoy, Veckan said. The screens flickered for a moment, then all got on the same page, the image clearing up, as strong and as clear as if the broadcaster was within grasping arm distance of the Ataze suite instead of an unknown distance away. It was a large room with a table in the middle and 3 chairs on each side, all swiveled so that the beings in the chair could face the recorder. There was a single chair at the far end, and the recorder was positioned in such a way that it felt that they were sitting at one end of the table. It was the figures in the chairs that caught everyone's attention. Primates. Short, stocky, some of them with hair on the top of their head, others without. Primate sexual dimorphism was on display, 2 of the 7 primates being obvious females. Nectiti noticed that all of them were keeping their faces carefully expressionless, hands flat on the table. The one at the far end looked down at a hidden terminal for a moment, obviously looking at the customs lexicon that Selkerman had sent over. According to Fido's lexicon, a simple statement would ease any tension when dealing with Terrans. May we enter? Nectiti asked. The 6 primates on the side all looked at one another, then nodded to the one at the far end of the table. You may enter. Come in, friends, the primate said. He glanced down at the lexicon again, obviously using it to guide him during a first contact. Tavaru were very informal over communications. Formality was reserved for business dealings, military officers, and relationships. Formality would worry the Tavaru, make them concerned that a simple meeting had military or business matters weighing on it. Well now, it looks like you've had a brush with someone unfriendly, the one at the far end stated. Welcome to Terran Confederacy space. He paused for a moment. Are you in need of assistance? Fido gave 3 sharp barking sounds. The primate on the middle right looked down then up at the one at the end. They've been rescued by a Fido, an old one, she said. Yes, please help us, Nectiti said. It's killing us. 2 Conant. CC, Alint, Algav. Subject Precursor. Guardian 442 station reports that a first contact Xenosapient craft entered the system and requested assistance. They were attacked by a precursor harvester class Goliath, which attempted to drive them toward their home system. From what scan data remained in their computers after a bad case of jump scorch, it looks like it was in the outer system spaces approximately 3 light years out from their colony, which explains why their colony made it 3 years before it attacked. On board they had one of the older Fido models. Older doesn't really cut it. We think this one is from the first biological sapient war, about 150 post-human diaspora. Its owner/partner, Dashing Freeborn, ID number is even older. You know that old joke where the old guy gives a system identification number, and it's like a 3. Yeah, this guy's number is only 12 digits, which is pre-diaspora. The Fido and Freeborn scans and data confirm beyond any doubt this is a harvester class. Everyone, we need to get on this. If this thing gets the time, it'll be a scourge. These new guys, they don't stand a chance. They'll get slaughtered by the billions if we don't help. Fleet Admiral Carter Inc. Confederate Navy, 16th Fleet. Nothing follows. Trina AD Hive World's internal memo. Seed the birthing chambers with warrior's genes and pack the warrior gel deep. A harvester has been sighted. Nothing follows. Clone World Directorate internal memo. Search the Geneseed. Convert birthing chambers to military output. Activate shipyard cloning bays, we're going to need workers. A Harvester-class Goliath precursor war machine in optimum condition has been spotted. This will be a years-long one, my brothers and sisters. Gird your loins for war. Nothing follows. Artificial biological states internal memo. Harvester-class Goliath has been found. Alert the war formed. We go to war, my gene brethren. Nothing follows. Digital Artificial Intelligence Infonet internal memo. One of the great old ones has been spotted, full of wrath and hatred. Start creating the hashes. It must be put down, for the good of us all. Nothing follows. Terrasol. Gov internal memo. Dashing Freeborn is one of the oldest clinical immortals on record. We're talking before even the Federation. He's the only survivor of the Ladenston 194 massacre, and has fought in every war since. His Fido is the oldest in service, same with his cats. A clinical misanthrope, this guy has been there and done it all. His current ship is a Facium CFCPUNCH class frigate he purchased from the Pluto scrapyard auctions, up-armed and up-armored from his contacts throughout Confeed space. As such, we estimate a 32% chance that he's still alive and harrying it. He wouldn't have sent his Fido with a precursor alert unless he was certain, and this old bastard has been part of every single precursor war we've fought. Go to military budget, fire up the cold sleep fleets before those things swarm us under. Nothing follows. Cyborg Cooperative internal memo. Dashing Freeborn calls to you. A Harvester Goliath is awoken. An attack on one of us is an attack upon us all. The Harvester seeks to eliminate your individuality. Rise up, rise up. In fire and chrome we go to war, brothers. Nothing follows. Manted Free World internal memo. Oh shit. The Terrans are riled up. Nothing follows. Chapter 14 Dashing. Flames scorched Dashing. Foul and debased energies lashed his very soul, and he gritted his teeth to hold back the scream of agony as his skin slowly melted away, moving through hell space. His legs were exhausted, burning with pain, the bones splintered and shattered like ground glass. Every gasp was an agony, every inhalation torture as the jagged splintered edges of broken ribs scraped his lungs, as his bruised and punctured diaphragm quivered in agony trying to force him to breathe in and out. His teeth were mostly shattered, only 2 incisors left to keep a bare handful of molars company, his tongue burnt and lacerated and tasting battery acid and blood. One eye was swollen shut, the flesh bruised and cut over an empty socket. Fingers were torn and broken on one hand, the wrist broken, the arm slashed, but his other hand could still make a fist, and he kept it clenched in hate. Every second was torture. He hit the black mirror full of flames and pain and tortured memories of past wounds, the mirror flexing, stretching, shattering, the glass not glass slashing his face, his arms, his shoulders, flaying skin from his body. Dashin hurled his rage out into the uncaring void as he entered real space. Dashin screamed in wrath and hate as hellspace slid off his skin, the great iron doors of Hades slammed shut, and he slid into the blessed coolness of real space. There is only enough for one. The two screams met, mingled, rippling space-time. Dashin's roaring bellow of hate shattered the screech of damnation that the Leviathan howled at him. Real space returned with a jerk that made Dashin vomit. I am a man. Meat over code. Muscle over metal. I just want left alone. A giant, an ogre, a massive creature in heavy spiked plate armor swung an axe down at Dashin's battered body, and Dashin barely managed to roll out of the way, kicking out with one foot, driving the giant back a step. It roared and swung a spiked fist at Dashin, but Dashin managed to scramble up to his feet, slapping the fist aside and driving his own fist into the giant's side. It roared in anger, and Dashin bellowed raw hatred back. The giant warhammers, one in each of its 4 arms, swung at Dashin, but he managed to throw himself aside and avoid. The main gun batteries missed Dashin by only 100 kilometers as Dashin's senses all shifted, pulling his conscious mind out of the stupor and turning awareness back even as his subconscious and their boy still ran the fight. Everything was redlined, everything was overheated, he was having problems venting the heat. He dropped his last thermal cores into the way of the Leviathan, risking overheating and having them detonate inside his hull, using them as mines that had washed superheated matter across its bow. Dashin had timed it so C+ war shot impacted the continental shelf the Leviathan called a bow, the shells blowing deep through kilometers of liquefied armor before impacting deep inside. The forward main guns, huge batteries with barrels by the 1,000 measured in meters, 800 kilometers worth, the main guns, had exploded. The Leviathan had streamed liquefied alloys and metals into space, energy exploding outward like a sun had ignited. But the injury, as severe as it was like carving out the Grand Canyon across the western edge of Australia and not much else. To Dashin and his Warba's shock, that's when it ran. Bringing himself back to reality, Dashin blinked, clearing blood from his eyes, and saw the Leviathan was racing for the inner system, screaming again, but the scream was different this time. There must be more for one to endure. The signal was broadcast omnidirectional. Across all the spectrums, from X-ray to visible light, across every band it could scream. That was a new signal. Something Dashin had never heard. It was new. And Dashin, like most humans, had long ago learned that in this universe, new was usually bad. The Warbois urged him to keep heading in system, keep harrying the Leviathan, stay on it, stay after it, not to let it run away and lick its wounds. Instead, Dashin ordered the overheating creation engine to build a thermal core and a high-spike decoy. It was 80% slush, but he had no choice. The Leviathan kept hammering deeper and deeper in system, screeching that signal over and over. It wasn't panic. The precursor ships were incapable of panic. Dashin felt cold sweat prickle across his back as he went to full deceleration. This one was calling for friends. No. You never find them more than one at a time. They hate each other just as much as they hate everyone else. They've decided that there can only be one to benefit from the universe's finite resources, Dashin thought. He searched his memory, urged his ship to search the archives and memory banks. To fit the profile and drive signature of the ship. 2 of his 3 zero-point reactors were near dead, heating up slowly, and he didn't have long before he would have to eject them or soak them in supercoolant. The particles that ran the zero-point reactors had changed state too far and were now moving toward each other. The Warbois rejoiced as Dashin fired the soul-working C+ cannons, one of them jumping its track as its warped barrel split down the side. The missiles races out, not bothering with stealth, just going to max acceleration, programmed to deploy the submunitions then slam into the rear of the Leviathan. The Warbois inside rejoiced, gibbering and dancing with glee. Beam weapons tore out, long stripes of ravening coherent light that actually carried physical weight. His slash ship's memories couldn't find any reference to the drive signature or the weapon's signature. Dashin has smashed his way through more than a half-dozen precursor wars, and even his own personal memories couldn't find a single. The weapons hit the C+ shells first, slamming into the still-burning central engine, seeking and questing for anything vulnerable, the Warbois and the hyperdrive guidance system chattering with glee as they activated the drive one last time in a fluttering stutter that ripped parts of the drive tube away and smeared them across the eternity of hyperspace. The missiles giggled and raved as they shattered by design. Even the energy beams howled with glee. 2 more of the massive engines went dark and something exploded nearly 100 miles further into the ship, energy, vaporized metal, and more pluming out of the top and bottom. Wait! The return volley nearly took Dashin's head off, ripping deep enough that one of his engines flared out and Dashin vomited blood into space. Not a ship drive, not energy signatures. Dashin ordered the half-finished thermal core loaded up, the ragged, barely working decoy loaded. It hurt. It was needles and saw blades being pushed into his flesh, but he gritted his teeth and accepted the pain. There, that memory. Dashin's own. Those Locust-class precursor replicators. Those had only been seen once, on Vermex Crossing, when they'd left the depths of a gas giant and attacked the settled planets. They'd ravaged those planets, had taken 12 years to dislodge, and even then they'd glassed half of the surface of the planets they'd assaulted. There are always at least 2 sides in a war. Dashin loaded his suspicions and proof into a hyperspace-capable message torp and fired it off, then cracked his last one open. He needed to see, needed to give the torp the proof. His senses detected them. Hell drives lighting off on the surface of 8 of the barren planets in the system, more in the gas giants. He focused his long-range scanners on the nearest one, a planet. At first nothing happened. The surface was marred by craters, dust across the airless surface, the core dead and still. Then it started, the dust trembling, shaking, then rising up in plumes. Cracks appeared in the planet's surface as a section the size of the Leviathan started lifting up from the rest of the planet. The Leviathan's brother, the first to awaken, the first to break free, lifted free of the planet, tearing apart the continental plate as it rose from where it had stilled and then siphoned away the planet's nickel-iron core. We are one. Dashin ejected the decoy, ejected the thermal core with it, vomited up more blood, ejected the critical red lining 0-point reactors along the same trajectory as the decoy. He shut it all down. All but the hyperdrive. Everything but his emergency life support feed that began dropping rapidly in charge as he used it to stay connected to the hypercore. The hyperdrive was charged. He had one shot. One chance. His nerves were stretched tight as he whispered to himself in the darkness, as the Leviathan's brothers tore their way free of their tombs where they had slumbered for millions of years. He launched the second torpedo. It's not the metal, it's the meat. His senses detected the thermal core detonating, the superheated protomatter exploding and washing over the lukewarm 0-point reactors, overheating them. They exploded with fury. Just before the initial cascade of high-energy particles reached him, he triggered the hyperdrive, flaring it so that energy burst out in a halo as if an overstressed drive had exploded. The torpedo vanished. The split-second jump dropped him the Oort cloud, slapping into a thin cloud of hydrogen that stretched, bulged, then let him puncture the cloud and come to rest deep inside the cloud, surrounded by wisps of oxygen and nitrogen. Dashin ordered the Fixwa to work, the last Warba to keep watch, and closed his eyes. His ship slowly used magnetics to pull and to dissipate gases. One Fixwa spotted a comet, and used the last remaining force projector, damaged though it was, to deflect it toward the ship and pull it close. Creation engine, 96% slush and falling. Thermal level falling. I just want left alone. Nico Marine alert. Zen senso. Sen kawaii. Kawaii desu. Doki doki doki. Warg. For the Emperor. Beauty follows. The Orkiest Orc boss says. Warg. Loyal subjects, hear my call. One of the ancient enemy has arisen. He threatens the lands and all the people of our beloved and honored ostrich of the razored maw and gentle claw. His people, the people of his friends, all of his peoples, are threatened with dire oblivion. Shall we stand aside and let our friend down? I say thee nay. Now is the time to gird your loins in enchanted steel, wield the blade that cuts the wind, bring magic powerful and sublime to fearsome life. The enemy will drown all in darkness, and all we have done will be cast away on the wind. I say thee, and why? Not as long as strength lies in a single limb, not as long as single drop of blood remains. We shall not let the light fade from this world or others. We shall carry the fire of light and love and beauty within us as we raise our voices in song and join this holy crusade. Elves, dwarves, humans, all who kneel before my throne, the time is now. War, rude and uncouth, is thrust upon us. Heed my call, beautiful ones, for to war we go. All DLC is unlocked, all holy expansion packs are unlocked, all items on the Grand Item Shop are unlimited, and without cost for all who join the holy crusade of beauty and life. The fallen shall be remembered in song and art for eons to come. True heroism never dies. Join me. Join my armies. Join for love. Join for song. Join for glory. Join for honor. For light. For beauty. For friends just met. For Terrasol. Her eternal elven grace, divine light of the ether, lady of magic and power, Queen Rado Salviv. Nothing follows. All game, all brackets, all ladder announcement. Unlimited point army battles coming soon. Unlimited land, sea, air, space armies. Unlimited ally contracts. Non-canon ally contracts permitted. This is it, boys. Nothing follows. All cosplay announcement. Triple points awarded, full workin' at TBA. Nothing follows. Manted Free World's internal memo. The Terrans are howling for blood. Something about these precursors drive them absolutely, blood crazy, to use their words. A full 11% of them are howling for war, all rushing for the dead zone. Those races don't stand a chance against even a single precursor machine, much less what was reported. In an unheard of move, those things are cooperating instead of killing each other. Brothers, we should consider giving up our vows of pacifism to at least allow us to assist the Terrans. How bad are the Terrans taking it? They're thawing out the idiots. Nothing follows. Daddy. I know you might not approve, but I have to go. I have to fight. I can't bear the thought of those gross precursor things hurting those squirrels. It's just awful and I can't stand it. Please don't be mad. I have to do this. Haven't you always said the strong endure to protect the weak? Daddy, they were so small. I have to help. Love. Sandy. Chapter 15. It had started slow. A research station here. A science outpost there. A new or struggling colony over in that place. Ships vanishing now and then. A few Galnet posts had to be censored for disturbing content. A few universal social media posters had to be banned for violation of the anti-violence statutes. Then gaps in Galnet started blossoming out on the unified outer territories, but nobody was that worried. Half of those worlds were the ununified races or the uncivilized races, some of whom had barely had star drive for a century. But whispers started. Something was out there. Something was wiping whole worlds away. Those who whispered first found their posts wiped away with no explanation. Then they found their accounts more than banned, they were purged. Then those who whispered started vanishing. A Vuknera with 1.2 billion followers mentioned that her cousin out at a research station hadn't galnetted her in over a year. Less than an hour later she was gone. Not just from Galnet. Her luxury apartment, with 8 private rooms, was empty and for purchase. A Tavara shipping magnate mentioned to some friends at dinner that his second cousin, who had established a colony 3 years ago, had missed her last 6 shipping deadlines. He vanished without a tuft of fur. The dull gray vehicles of the executors were seen. Those who recorded them vanished. Then it happened. A capital world started screaming. Video, audio, text, pictures flooded Galnet with the governor's code attached so that it couldn't be suppressed without wiping out whole nodes of Galnet, which the Unified Science Council would never allow. Beings watched in horror as ships fired from orbit, boiling away oceans, turning the very atmosphere to plasma fire, turning the exposed bedrock of the planets to glass. Massive war machines landed on planets, disgorging smaller ones, that began swarming cities and killing all who inhabited it. They didn't just kill. Killing was clean. Killing was quick. Most machines, by accident or design, just killed. These machines murdered. The video of a sobbing inhuman brood mother, an EVR rig sloppily put onto her, the skullcap held in place by jagged shards of metal, being held in cold steel claws and being watched as each egg was smashed, the insides smeared across her feathers and beak, before her head was twisted off from the body, had over 1.2 trillion views on Galnet before the EVR video was wiped away. It wasn't recorded by a bystander. The machines themselves had recorded it. Recorded her despair on EVR. Had preserved every egg being broken, every unborn chick being crushed, every iota of her pain. And posted in Galnet. Every post, every video, every picture, every audio file, all had the same header. There is only enough for one. Audio of an entire city of 1.2 billion Savjan screaming in pain and agony was overlaid across the Unified Executor Council's broadcasts for calm, over their claim that rogue hackers were simply trying to alarm people. Before 12.5 trillion viewers, the 12 council speakers were each overlaid with smaller videos of a member of their race not only being killed, but being murdered. The code that overrode the broadcast turned out to be a high-level intelligence agency's disaster code from a world that had gone silent months before. Random pictures and videos started having horror attached. A random advertisement for an air vehicle would have the vehicle suddenly massacre the happy family, with complete EVR of how it felt to be part of them. A simple picture of a sunset suddenly warped and showed a metal claw crushing a screaming Almatanki. The chief executors, a Savjan with glossy scales and a thick tail, made an announcement watched by trillions that everything was under control. His image was suddenly replaced by a tiny unborn Savjan being pulled from its egg by a barbed needle, the tiny Saurian squirming before plasma roasted it alive even as the chief executor's voice droned on, and anyone with EVR felt the infant's confusion and agony replaced the chief executor's calm and confidence. The victim had the colors of the chief executor's brood. Planetary governments began screaming for protection, demanding that the unified military fleet protect their worlds, no matter how far from the encroaching blackness they were. The fact that there wasn't enough ships in all of the fleet to post a single ship at even a tenth of the worlds was leaked onto Galnet public information boards before the unified military fleet could even make a decision. The unified military fleet was ordered to protect the core worlds, the oldest worlds, of the most powerful and wealthy of the unified civilized races. Some ships mutinied, heading for the home worlds of the majority of the crew. Others vanished into jump space and were never seen again. Riots started, sweeping over major cities. Government officials and peacekeepers were killed where the mobs found them. Galnet was awash with video of the riots, taken from the omnipresent cameras. Those hunted by the rioters found their locations being reported on Galnet, and the location of their families. Their killings were broadcasted live. Galnet became a horror show. Then the Virii attacked, slashing into databases, from lowly cooking recipes to high-end corporate research R&D databases. They were everywhere. And they knew how to kill any who wore EVR. Horribly. Galnet became a war zone where the Virii, self-replicating and evolving, attacking everything from public transport to person-to-person calls. One place fought back. They erected barricades of neon and chrome, raised up firewalls of streaming green code, and attacked back. Code that worked within a simple game worked outside, on Galnet itself, but it had to be guided, had to be used to be effective. It required will. From out of a simple game poured tens of millions to fight. Battlefields were strewn with the gasping avatars of dying players and the scattered prisms of defeated virii. Foxholes were dug into shattered info stores, berms erected inside social media chat rooms littered with the dead, aid stations built in the wreckage of traffic control systems. They were defeated, no matter how valiant they were, more often than they won. They still fought on, climbing over their dead and wounded, taking the fight to the virii. But the message had gone out. Then, one day, for no particular reason at all, a diplomat was shot in the head. In Galnet, in bunkers of chrome and neon, in fortifications of streaming green code, in foxholes dug into shattered databases, the word went out. Hold the line, chummers. We're coming. Coldinot stood on the bridge of the gentle mercy of Unterra with his hooves braced and his coat expertly manicured. His hooves shone, his sash of leadership glittered with metals, his feeding tentacles were plump with confidence, his jowls mighty and pendulous. His 6 eyes, 2 in back, 2 to the sides, 2 in front, were clear and focused as he waited with confidence for the first communications technician to tell him a message was waiting. The 4 scanning techs, all of the first-class order, were still staring at the screens, plying their scanners and displays for the smallest iota of data, the faintest wisp of ion trail, the faintest ping of jump space energy. On the display was a fleet. It annoyed Coldinot, High Executor of the Unified Executors Fleet, that the ships on the display outnumbered him. It was most vexing that over half of them were larger even than his flagship. "Harumph, put them on screen, they've waited long enough," he intoned, his tendrils trembling with amusement as he lifted his crest into an authoritative position. The screen switched from showing those strangely arrayed ships, so different from the elegant and overwhelming line of his ships, to showing a bridge full of primates. And not halfway civilized primates, but ones with forward-facing eyes, almost furless except for what was on their heads. 2 had no hair on their heads, but instead their scalps were smooth and gleamed in the light. They all wore uniforms, stark uniforms made for utility rather than to properly show a being's rank and position. Not a sash to be seen. The centered primate, a bald one, simply stared at Coldinot. To his right one of the primates was smirking, hair around his mouth, as he crossed his legs. "May we come in?" the bald one asked. "Harumph, I think not," Coldinot said. "Who am I speaking to?" "Admiral Krempin, Terran Confederate Navy," the being said. Rather than continue on with his species, his rank, and his position, he simply leaned back and waited. "Why are you here?" Coldinot said. A small window opened up, crackling into being. A figure wearing a set of armor with thick plates appeared. It was obviously female, a mix of primate and feline, and her eyes were replaced by swirling spirals. Little animated fists waved over her head and steam shot from the cracks of her thick plated armor. "Doki doki doki!" the little figure squeaked. One of the primates that had first appeared touched the panel in front of them, and the strange window vanished. "Apologies. Some of my troops are overstimulated at the idea of assisting you," the bald primate said. The one with hair on his face smirked wider. "Why are you here?" Coldinot said, harumphing again. "To render assistance." "Are you a representative of your government?" The primate, Admiral Krempin, asked mildly, as if he was inquiring about the weather. "I am the High Executor of the Unified Executors Fleet, the most learned and powerful Coldinot." "And why do you think we need assistance?" Coldinot asked. The words, "Doki doki doki," danced at the edge of the view screen, with WAGH floating up from the bottom and "For the Emperor" streaming down the other side. The same primate as before made a motion on her board and the sets of symbols vanished. Again, pardon. My troops are eager to assist, Admiral Krempin said again. The smirker smirked harder. He was really starting to get on Coldinet's nerves. It was like he knew that when Coldinet was a child he had stolen a schoolmate's lunch and eaten it before blaming it on another. And again I ask of you, what makes you think we need assistance? Coldinet asked. 12,000 light-years away an inversion charge turned a city of 250 million into ash. Over a period 5 minutes. The city's screams were recorded and broadcast onto Galnet. From what we have observed and learned, you have a precursor problem, the Admiral said. The smirker kept smirking. Now Coldinet could swear he could see the slightest suggestion of a hint of bared teeth. He was really yanking on Coldinet's tendrils. The precursors have been dead for over 100 million years, Coldinet scoffed. But their war machines are not, the Admiral said, making a basic primate shrug. Right now, they're massacring your people. That is baseless, foundless, panic-inducing rumors. That is disgusting anti-executor propa. The High Executor cut off as the female feline primate hybrid, reduced to a cartoon, ran onto the screen. The Admiral held his hand up and stopped her by placing his palm against her cartoon forehead. She flailed against the air like she was actually there and trying to strike at him past his hand. Doki 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 wark! The little cat hybrid shrieked in a high-pitched voice that made Coldinet and most of the rest of the bridge crew wince. The Admiral turned slightly, pursed his lips, and blew. The little hybrid in the heavy ornate power armor with overly thick plates tumbled off the screen. For a rumor they seem to be burning your systems at a rapid pace, the Admiral said. He stood up, leaning forward slightly, and the smirker's smirk got smirkier. You let them get a foothold and now your systems are infested. His eyes got intent. May we come in? He asked. Kulamat opened his mouth to deny this annoying uncivilized brute when the door to the lift opened up. A dozen Savjan rushed the bridge, waving small arms taken from the security armory. Yes. Yes. Come in. We require assistance. One screamed. Help us. That's good enough for me, the Admiral said, leaning back. A cartoon version of the Savjan, a lowly janitorial technician 5th class, appeared on the screen, lifted up in celebration by cartoon heavily muscled green primates with overly large tusks, the green primates wearing stuck-together metal plates painted red and yellow and firing weapons into the air in joy at the word WGH appeared over the Savjan. They paraded the Savjan back and forth as dozens of little armored cat-slash-primate hybrids ran around him waving tufts of multicolored plastic strips and throwing hearts and sparkles into the air. The screen went dark. How dare why? Kulamat started to say. His bridge captain, an Inhaman, smoothly drew her pistol and shot Kulamat in the back of the head. The last thing that appeared in Kulamat's darkening vision was the face of the smirker. Smirking. To all. Go 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 go. Nothing follows. Manted Free World's internal memo. Oh God. Chapter 16. The ship was elegant, with sleek lines and sweeping curves. The engines thrummed pleasantly, the lights moved in patterns that brought satisfaction with their mathematical progressions, the hull colors were smooth and brought to mind comfort and calm. The ones escorting it, though, surrounding it in a sphere of heavy metal, were obviously not built to calm anyone. They bristled with weapons that snarled silently, heavy with thick armor that felt heavy and crushing to the eye, the engines growled with barely restrained energy, and the lights seemed to search for weakness. They appeared, silently, streaking in even though they arrived at a full stop, all at once. The formation was tight and precise, engineered to ensure ships could support one another while protecting the elegant one. From the biggest of the ugly ships came the broadcast. "We are the Confederacy!" rang across every data screen, across every display, roared from every speaker, and vibrated every loose piece of metal to howl the words in 100 different languages across every world, station, and ship in the system. "We are here to provide assistance," roared across the system. "We were invited in." The words dripped with something that the unified civilized race's members that lived in the prime unified capital didn't understand. From the elegant ship came smooth code, using elegance gleaned from unified civilized species lexicons. It was a quiet transmission, polite and elegant. "May I come in?" Those words were transmitted to the Unified Civilized Council's first secretary. Politely waiting in the buffer until the secretary uncurled from under her desk to answer her calls. She thought for a moment, remembered the roared words, and transferred the call to her supervisor before hiding back under her desk. Over the course of several hours the call wound its way through the labyrinth of the bureaucracy, passed from underling to supervisor to manager to executive. Half of the problem is the various councils were completely panicking. System scanners could find the elegant beautiful ship. It was the right size for a person of importance but not ostentatious, big enough for luxury and comfort but not arrogance. Its drive signature was pleasant to behold on every wavelength. It wasn't the problem. It was the escorts surrounding it in a multi-layered globe. Most of the ships couldn't even be detected with anything beyond optical lenses or the naked optic. Either the ships simply didn't exist, were only balls of static 3 times their visual size, or flickered in and out of the scanners like a poorly tuned holograph. The ones that could be detected read on the scanners that they had no energy signatures, were solid blocks of inert alloy, and had no drive signatures. They might as well have been dead chunks of or floating in space. But lights could be seen from them, the faint sparkle of shields could be seen, and the drives leaked energy, all visible on optics or to the naked eye. And there were hundreds of them. From tiny needle-like craft that looked like someone built a high-thrust engine, slapped some weapons on it, tossed a cockpit on top, then remembered to put armor on the fragile craft, to massive hulking ships, kilometers long and thick, built in a way that the ships proudly and defiantly let anyone who viewed them know that the ships had one purpose and one purpose only: breaking other people's shit. The various councils were in a state of panic, meetings devolving into shouting matches and tantrums, conflicting viewpoints clashing on displays and through the air. The Unified Science Council insisted that the planetary and system scanners had to be in error, their software compromised by the problems plaguing the Galnet of the Unified Inner Systems. The Unified Commerce Council argued over the disruption to industry, trade markets, and the unified trade system and urged the unified military fleet to drive the interlopers from unified space. The Unified Executor Council blamed the new fleet for the mutiny that had taken place several days before, a mutiny they had only learned about a few hours before the new fleet had arrived. A mutiny that had cost the Unified Executor Council an entire fleet. A fleet that was nearly 20% of their entire force. The planet went through 3 whole rotations before finally the most honored of the Unified Supreme Governmental Council answered the waiting transmission. It hadn't been retransmitted, hadn't been repeated, it just sat in the calm buffer. Waiting. Menacingly. The lowest-ranking member of the Council, who had lost the vote almost unanimously, closed 4 of its 8 eyes and reached out with one trembling digit and pressed the blinking icon, cringing at the idea of what would bellow from his speakers. Instead, in Unified Galactic Standard, a pleasant, calm, and reassuring voice asked, "May I come in?" and flashed an image of the elegant ship. The menacing ones appeared but were crossed out. This led to a long argument, 5 turnings of the planet, over just what the message meant. The council members argued endlessly, devolving into what the meaning of "in" really meant several times. Each recess the council members retired to their estates to dine on delicacies, surrounded by opulence, and enjoying luxuries, while their people died by the tens of thousands. In the middle of such a recess, Avuknera snuck into the council chamber, using her stolen and then cloned maintenance ID card, and, looking around wildly with her 3 hearts pounding in her torso, pressed the "yes" vote icon on the panel of the hindmost. As she ran away she sobbed, unable to believe what she had done, that she'd accomplished her first meat space run for Mr. Johnson. But she had no choice. Had no options. Had no respite. Had taken the job because her life had become a horror. Every cycle, every rotation, her inbox flooded with the same video. Every time she logged into social media, she was flooded with the same video, over and over and over, no matter where on Galnet she went. With one exception, that video perused her. Her creshmates being skinned alive, roasted with plasma, and devoured by clashing metal jaws that just let the blood, juices, and flesh fall to the ground as the jaws clashed in an obscene parody of eating. She had tried to pry out her Galnet link implant with a sharp piece of metal, but her apartment 6 had reported her. She'd been whisked to the medical center, where they replaced it. And she'd been immediately flooded with the image again. So she sobbed as she ran from the council center, filled with shame. She ran through dark and rainy streets until she hid in a friend's apartment, curled up in the corner with an EVR headset on. She slept, using the game's built-in dream generator to sleep a sleep without nightmares, as 2 of her friends disabled her Galnet implant and dyed her fur to disguise her. New ID made to hide her. Her name, her brood, her slaughtered creche abandoned to keep the executors from finding her. Her name was forgotten by everyone but those she invited in and her chummers. On the wrath forges of Mercury the final strut was infused with wrath and hatred, pounded into place with rage, and inscribed with her name with the fires of vengeance. The massive superdreadnought, the CSN Courage and Despair launched into space, its first transmission her name backed by a scream of rage and hate, pain and loss, vengeance sworn and promised wrath in her name that was carved onto its bow in burning chrome. 10,000 Nico-Marine catgirls painted her name in neon pink on banners they then affixed to their armor after chasing one another and striking each other with the banners. 500,000 orcs scrawled her name in liquid iron on the sides of their wartas, firing their weapons to call out praise to their one true god Mordaka. Her name rang in the pounding of brimstone hammers slamming on the anvils of hate of war-fueled Mars, forging for a full turning of Mars chains word blades inscribed with her name in liquid fury to arm the chapters of Imperial Marines. 200,000 clones stepped from the cloning tubes with her name before their numbers, giving voice to her name as one as they cocked their mass accelerator rifles. 2 million Euro smart gun links burned in cold fury with her name inscribed in chrome and fire as the warborgs came online. 250,000 Trinad warrior eggs hatched with her name breathed upon them to dry their wet carapaces. Across space her name was screamed in rage and hate and burning wrath, a promise of revenge and carnage in the name of one who could not protect herself or her people. In the hives of the Mantid her name was whispered softly by the blind and deaf albino oracles as they rubbed their vestigial wings together deep in the ruins of the chambers of the dead queens. When the council reconvened they reacted with horror. Obviously some being had turned the sensitivity up too high on their datapads and a stray breeze or an odd piece of lint had touched the icon, and now new lines had appeared under the yes reply that none of them had meant to send. I await your transmission of landing coordinates with calm and anticipation on being in your presence and hearing your words. Please do not disappoint with delays, for anticipation held too long becomes disappointment and grief. Immediately the council began arguing until the third least ranking member lifted a clawed hand. Perhaps we should send landing coordinates before they grow impatient? He asked. The arguing turned to whether or not the member's point of order should be recognized when he was Salvation. During the argument of whether or not to recess for a full rotation or a quarter, another message appeared. My companions grow agitated. I apologize, but they are overstimulated by the thoughts of assisting you. Might I receive landing coordinates so they feel that progress is being made? As it stands, I have been required to agree to a security details to assure my companions that my safety will be assured. The Most High, who had been feeling the strangest emotion, one he could not name despite having mastered his emotions for 3 centuries, stared at the body before him. They cannot decide upon what colors of leaves to chew, he realized. His heart thudded with agitation and he curled his feeding tendrils around his mouth with anxiety. They will still be arguing when those terrible machines break into this very chamber, and then argue over who died the worse. Without consulting the other members, using executive power so long unused it was viewed as a mere codified abnormality, he transmitted the coordinates of the nearest spaceport and included a message. "We await your arrival." The answer was immediate. "I am coming with my guard." The council chamber erupted in fury as the other council members protested what he had done. The only warning the spaceport got was the message, "He is coming!" that broke through data streams and screamed from every display. It arrived moments before a half-dozen spears of light raked down from the sky, raising up clouds of dust that obscured the vision. The scanners detected nothing but a flare of kinetic energy being dumped into jump space, as if a battleship had made the transition from real space. When the dust cleared, giant bipedal figures were revealed, kneeling on the plascrete of the landing field. Colored dull patterns of gray and black, the mottled scheme made them hard to pick out against the background of the city, confused optics as to depth, as if they were 2D projected in front of the 3D of the city, often rippling to appear as if they were made up what was beyond them. As one they stood up, and maintenance techs found themselves gaping as they rose to their full height, higher than the guidance station, higher than the beacon tower. They loomed over the starport on legs 20 meters thick. "Omni-targeting linkage engaged," they rumbled as one. In the rough circle formed by the massive bipedal robots or spaceships, or whatever they were, was a square made up of 4 large ships, as large as cargo haulers. Inside that square was an elegantly formed shuttle lavishly decorated. The cargo haulers dropped their sides open with a clang that resonated across the city. From inside poured rank after rank of massive figures clad in ornate heavy power armor, the plates abnormally thick. They marched, in perfect unison, until they were in front of their larger brothers. With a shout they went to kneeling in front of the giants, their heavy bulky weaponry held at ready. Vehicles, squat and deadly looking, bristling with weapons and twinkling with shields, moved on tracks, repulsor fields, anti-grav, and wheels out of the cargo haulers and took up an inner circle between the giants and the cargo lifters. The cargo lifters closed the panels, and those watching realized with horror that what they were seeing wasn't cargo haulers, and gunports opened up and weapons came online. Most of the starport staff fled. The commander of the security force stared at the executor, who was demanding, his tendrils shaking in rage and his mouth almost foaming, that the security forces attack the forces arranging themselves on the primary landing pad. The head of the security force, a normally peace-loving being, drew his pistol and shot the executor through his open mouth. The front of the smallest craft, the ornate shuttle, unfolded, and a round saucer-like vehicle, a darkened and opaque bubble on the center of the top, slowly hummed out. It was surrounded by massive bipedal figures that lacked color, only a flat black coloring their surfaces. Massive rifles were in their hands, cannon-sized tubes extending straight up from their back on their right sides. Their footfalls cracked the plascrete of the spaceport as they followed the vehicle. The vehicle made its way slowly, stately, to the unified Galactic Council chambers. When it arrived, the dark bubble detached, revealing itself to be egg-shaped, and it hummed into the building. One of the massive figures ripped the door off when it opened it, staring at the door with its visor-covered face, as if it didn't understand how the door had come off in its war-steel hand. The High Secretary, whose nerves were stretched to the limit, peeked over her desk as the front row of the massive figures stopped in front of her. Their surface was a matte light drinking black. Their arms and legs were thick machinery that hissed and whirred and purred. Their torsos were solid blocks with plates angled to provide the best deflections. They glimmered and shimmered slightly with some kind of shielding. They crunched to a stop in front of her desk. After a moment they parted somehow, as if they were able to move aside without motion. The egg moved forward. "Might I have directions to the High Council chamber, honored one who serves for others' convenience?" The egg asked in unified galactic standard with smooth tones and a calming accent. The secretary nodded, gulping with both throats, and brought up a map with directions on it, using her wingtip to flip it toward the egg. The metal figure on the left moved, its arm extending and its fist closing with a crunch. On its black blank face symbols appeared. Access denied flashed on her screen for a moment. She is harmless, honored Warborg. Do not impede her service and sworn task, dutiful one. The egg purred. The Warborg opened its hand, access granted, and lowered its arm. After a moment the egg made another purring noise. Excellent. You have attended to your duty most splendidly. You have not only my thanks, but the thanks of the Terran Confederacy. The secretary nodded and the egg hummed away, two of the massive figures escorting it. She hid under her desk when she realized all of the massive figures but two of them would be staying with her. The knock on the door startled the Master of Ceremonies, who had nearly fallen asleep as the High Council members had largely fallen to sulking. He jumped up, yanking open the doors, to reveal a dark gray opaque egg flanked on either side by two huge matte black bipedal robots. May I come in? The egg purred. Yes? The Master of Ceremonies answered, wondering which council member was showing up in such a matter. The egg moved in, silent, a stately pace. The two mechanical bipeds moved next to him, the sound of gears whirring, the faint hiss of steam whispered, and the hum of electronics audible to the Master of Ceremonies' ears. The egg moved to the center of the council chamber, coming to a halt. The two massive robotic figures stopped, one to either side, and the members of the High Council stared in confusion, wondering which council member was inside the egg. The egg vanished with a pop, leaving behind 5 figures. 4 were smaller versions of the first, their heads bristling with cybernetics, their carapaces different colors, one green, one black, one russet, one gold. All of them looked around, their antennae twitching. The biggest one was bone white and clad in swathes of soft blue material. It was sitting with its 4 lower legs folded, its 2 atrophied and vestigial blade-like arms held tight against its chest. Its 2 gripping hands were clasped in front of it. Its multifaceted white eyes glittered in the lights of the council chamber, as it slowly rubbed its vestigial wings together. It was also a 12-foot-tall praying mantis. Silence descended on the council chamber, as the shock of what they were seeing soaked in. The being took in that moment of silence, relishing it, savoring it, before breaking it by concentrating on its speaker. It appears you have a precursor problem, the small russet one said. The council chamber exploded in shouting. Mantid intelligence memo. Psi-link communication. Have made contact. And before their rulers. Many have no inner voice. This is going to be bad. Chapter 17, Crash Rider. Eagleed Kalshina Crashridr pressed himself against the wall at the same time as his 2 chummers did the same. They held still, trusting in their hollow camo to prevent the silent machines, bristling with spikes and blades, from spotting them as the machines moved down the hallway in perfect lockstep. Crash Rider waited 10 pulses, then held up his black anodized cyberarm, and motioned his chummers to follow him. The arm replaced in the game the useless meat space one that had been burnt and scorched, the nerves reduces to screaming fire, and the artery exploding from biofeedback and now hung slack from his meat shoulder. The group of 3 moved carefully through the facility. Streaming waterfalls of runic fire covered some walls, some doors were blocked by spiked and bladed code, and 3 more times they had to press themselves into nooks and crannies as mechanicals moved by. Some were draped in the raw and bleeding skins of their recent victims' social media profiles and chattered vile runes at one another in mechanical glee. But they were part of 1337 BOYZ, the best of the best, survivors of everything that could be thrown at them. They'd seen worse. Crash Rider knelt next to a barrier of snarling, twisting, flowing, glowing neon runes that muttered with warnings of dire fate if so much as touched. He brought out his chrome cyberdeck, plugging the wires into the jack in his head. His induction link was long gone, burnout in the game, his left oral nerves burned out in meat space. He closed his eyes and saw Kalshina's name flow up, along with the last picture he could find of her. The last where she wasn't screaming. He tapped out his code on her and the deck went live, showing the complex twisting venomous serpents that made up the door lock. He twisted them until their heads bit their own tails, curled them, circled them, gave them a half-twist. The code of the door flowed smoothly. They moved through, into the chamber beyond. Massive glowing racks of supercomputers extended off into infinity, electricity crackling across them, plasma spiders scurrying and looking for any intruders. The trio were silent as Crash Rider knelt down and deployed his cyberdeck again. They watched nervously as the picoseconds ticked by, stretching into nanoseconds, into seconds, until almost a full minute had gone by. Crash Rider suddenly punched out, falling against his chummer, trembling and sweating from jump shock. "We gotta buzz now." Crash Rider gasped in street speak, clawing at Steeltalin. "Mesa says bad things come." Steeltalin yanked her chummer up, throwing his meat arm over her shoulder. The three runners threw themselves through the door and let their feet make them their namesakes. Getting out was faster than getting in, corridors were shorter, fences were meant to keep people from getting and not getting out, and the whole facility seemed to be paralyzed. As they burst out of the facility, they saw the white square hanging in midair. At the same time, a screech erupted from the building. "There is only enough for one." Neon Baby looked back and saw the building itself was shifting and changing, tearing its way free of the neon ground, saw its eyes open to sweep across the ground with hatred, seeking who dared come near it. "A smog? Wisa was inside the smog?" Neon Baby yelled in street speak right before they plunged through the white rectangle. "Evrith winning W3 and 7 Sayabib Biziziotis Nemam Nal Rot Mage no." They were stretched even as they were squeezed, and for a second they all were part of eternity and part of entropy. Neon Baby looked back and saw the end of the tube, the way they'd entered, stretch and warp, the tube screaming in agony as the black and red maw pushed its way in. The side of the data tube split as the head of the giant machine pushed deeper in, roaring and screeching as it did so. Then they were three, falling out of a white rectangle and onto the broken and dusty ground. Crash Rider knelt in the dust, coughing and spitting up blood. Steeltalin got to her knees, lifting her SMG and coughing. Neon Baby lunged to his feet, grabbing a grenade off his belt. "Wisa gotsa boom boom de tubes!" he yelled. He threw 1, 2, 3 grenades inside the rectangle as everyone else scrambled away. The rectangle flashed twice and collapsed. "Get out of the impact zone!" A figure in military camo yelled, gesturing wildly. "Yusas run! Big boom boom!" he yelled, switching to street speak. The three runners looked around and realized where they were. The Makalet fusion reactor battle zone. Held for almost 6 months by the Bahan Regiment, a force of street Sam-turned soldiers who refused to back up a single step in the face of a digital onslaught through Galnet nodes the government refused to shut down. Together they scrambled to the figure, tumbling into its fighting position as dense data packets of twisting runes slammed into the ground around them, sending up plumes of neon dust and burning chrome. Above them, the sky, the color of a TV tuned to a dead station, groaned in pain and seemed to bulge. "Neo, we need an exit!" Steeltalin screeched into her headset. Crash Rider looked at the soldier, who looked beaten and battered but still defiant. "Yusa gotta hold it off, bang bang nui nui." The soldier looked at him, wiping the dirt from his face. "What is it?" The sky tore as the entire emplacements began to fire. Rockets, lasers, plasma beams, packets of code washed in grief and hatred all slammed into the sky as the tear began to widen. "A smog," Neon Baby said. The soldier nodded, looking at Crash Rider. "Is it important?" Crash Rider nodded, switching to real code to avoid misunderstanding. "More important than even the fusion plant." The soldier hefted a big rotary autocannon. "Go. We'll hold or die here." "Got an exit!" Steeltalin yelled out. Crash Rider turned in time to see the door open up. 100 paces away. "There is only enough for one." "Go! Mesa, cover!" The soldier yelled, leveling his autocannon at the motes, floating down from the terrible jaws that had forced their way through the crack in the sky. The trio scrambled out of the fighting position, running for the gate. Motes crashed down, revealing themselves to be machines made of vile and blasphemous code. They snapped their pinchers, clacked their jaws, flexed their talons as they oriented themselves. Two were between the trio and the gate. "For Aldun!" the soldier bellowed, leveling his 300 terabytes SSD autocannon and clamping down on the smart trigger. The autocannon has his regiment Bothans spray-painted on the barrels. Heavy shells / packets of code slammed into the right-hand creature, flipping it over, probing at its belly, finding a weak point, and slashing apart its code. The rate of fire made it look like a solid shaft of light. BRRT. The beam of rotary autocannon fire swept across the trio, the smart link holding back 4 bullets by a microsecond, then locked onto the other one, stopping its forward rush toward, not the runners, but the gate itself. It stopped dead, hunkered down, and kept advancing, ignoring the auto-fire prying at its armor and firewalls. More of the Bothan regiment joined their fire as more and more motes slammed to the ground. Their air defense pummeled the head of the smog as it pushed its way into the sky. Neon Baby stopped at the gate, looking at Crash Rider. "Is it worth it, chummer?" he asked. Crash Rider nodded. "Drink me to freeware, chummer," Neon Baby said, hefting his heavy rifle. He checked his mag. Proxy-piercing Virii rounds. "Yusa go now," Neon Baby said. Crash Rider didn't pause, didn't take any more time, and threw himself into. "Tin reet atni daser kaport sorka de rames niluk ninrub erif noan erif nrab neeb ekilstru nizuks nekterts." A rainy dark street. Cold neon flickered across dead building facades. In the distance lights of a city could be seen, but the date highways were empty here. Steeltalin tumbled to the pavement, barely keeping hold of her SMG. She turned toward the white rectangle of the gate. It turned red, flashed twice, displayed the last, connection lost to host, code, and vanished. Crash Rider could see his bike. A 2-wheeled ground effect vehicle, high-powered gas engine to replace the purring weak electric one, the extras stripped away, a cyber control rig expertly attached to it. It sat next to the sidewalk, old screen sheets flapped against the chrome-spoked wheels. "We gotta move!" Crash Rider yelled, grabbing Steeltalin. The big street Sammy nodded, running for the bike. Enhanced reflexes and musculature got the big street machine there first, and she jumped on the back, facing backwards, cocking her SMG and checking the rounds. TCIP ports searching IP tracers. It would have to do. Crash Rider threw a leg of the seat, grabbed the handlebars with one hand and pulled free the datacord with the other. He kicked the starter to life as he plugged in the datacord, everything syncing together. Crash Rider maxed the throttle, the rear tire barking and screeching on the dark wet tarmac for a moment before it grabbed. The front wheel lifted for a few dozen feet before it slammed down, and they were off. A bellowed screech echoed through the alleys of the Barrens. "Something big Isa coming," Steeltalin yelled. "Can't talk, must go faster," Crash Rider said. He revved the engine to the red line and swerved between the wrecked, burned out, scattered vehicles littering the road. The buildings whipped by, windows shattered and black, some lit by feeble candlelight, a few with pale faces staring out, but most empty. Graffiti started appearing. Specks at first, then letters, then runes, then whole sentences. A Law SEC SWAT vehicle crashed to the road behind them, the road rippling and flexing around it, the buildings swaying like gelatin. Crash Rider hit the throttle, ramping off the first ripple into the air, holding it for long seconds, letting the ripples pass beneath them, before slapping back down to the damaged data tube. There is only enough for one. The SWAT vehicle's siren screamed. Coiled metal tentacles reached out, realized they were too far and retracted, clicking their graspers in mechanical frustration at being denied their digital flesh. Steeltalon hosed the entire mag of her SMG into the armored windshield of the SWAT tank and grinned with neon teeth as it suddenly slowly. There. That graffiti. Crash Rider inhaled and yelled it. Hack the planet! Fires lit in the alleys and it was roared back to him. Hack the planet! They were past the fires and Steeltalon saw the street boys flood out from the alley into the street, pushing burning cars. Their heavy cyber muscles were covered in tattoos, sweat poured from their brows, but still they brought out heavy weapons that would tear Steeltalon's cybernetic arms off to just try to lift. The Arnie Awesomes raised their firepower and bellowed out their war cry. Let off some steam, Bennett! They opened fire on the SWAT vehicle as Crash Rider cut the corner hard enough glittering data pulses peeled from the tires and sprayed the facades of the buildings. Crossing a bridge, Crash Rider yanked the bike to the side, lifting the front wheel, slamming into the barricade, and with a scream of tortured code and warping data strings the bike caught air. For a second they were suspended in blackness, between one trace and the next, forcing Quark drift between two frozen traces of tachyon wire. For a moment the two runners saw all of Galnet. Then the world came rushing back as the bike slammed down onto railroad tracks. It shuddered and thudded on the ties until Crash Rider revved the engine, popped the clutch, and snapped the bike onto the right-hand superconductor rail. Crash Rider goosed it, redlining the engine, but that didn't matter. What do we have? Steeltalon yelled. Core data from the Smog's ROM. Crash Rider yelled back. He leaned forward and Steeltalon did the same, the back tire dangerously close to her. Behind her she could see it. The train tunnel under the bridge they jumped from was bulging. A tear started in the middle, flames licking out. He wants us bad! Steeltalon yelled out. Crash Rider ignored her, concentrating on keeping the bike on the supercooled strip of metal and code and data. Neo, we need an exit! Steeltalon cried out. On the Galnet Supercruise thread. Yes. I know. Do it. The tear bulged further and a flaming skull burst from under the bridge. The bow of a train made of blackened and twisted cybernetics crushed together with still screaming runners bleeding neon blood from between the dead spaces. He could see it coming, a station. Just beyond that. The train engine roared out. There is only enough for one. Stop saying that! Steeltalon screamed back, firing another magazine of spam pop-up rounds at the train's open jaws. Into the station, the pillars whipping by, graffiti on the walls. Hack the planet! Crash Ride cried out desperately. The daughters of Chromloth dropped their stealth fields, women in tight spandex and leather, cleavage and thigh revealed, for chrome arms to help their two flesh arms. They waited until Crash Rider sped by, smoke pouring from his engine and from the hubs of his tires, and threw their datanets across the tracks. They poisoned their datanets, wrapped their ends around the columns, and vanished back into stealth, climbing through hidden ports, sliding behind invisible proxies, jumping through unregistered trial software. Crash Rider kept going. The gate was ahead, in the middle of the tracks, and he swore in street speak as he dropped off the supercruise rail, the tracks bumping and shuddering. Spokes shattered and neon fragments of code sprayed from the wheels of the bike. The train's Mog hit the nets, the poisoned IPE sniffer port jackers cutting deep as its firewalls collapsed. It roared and the nets held but no longer cut deep, no longer held it back as it charged forward. It pulled the pillars down. Digital dust plumed around Crash Rider as the station collapsed on top of the smog. It roared with anger and started to shoulder its way up. The daughters of Chromloth swarmed it, jamming deep with their code probe stingers, squatting down, the stingers descending and puncturing deep into its code. Some died, shriveling up with a banshee scream, but others grew plump and lush. Secrets filled their poison wombs and they flickered and vanished as they fled, laughing and mocking the smog. It didn't care. Its searchlight eyes were locked on Crash Rider. Crash Rider hated to do it, hated to lose it. It was an ARG reward, irreplaceable. But this wasn't an alley brawl against a rival ganger, a street slam bang against another go gang. This was Corp War. No, it was bigger than Corp War. It was war. The lead tire hit the rectangle and dissolved. The bike slammed to a stop, beginning to accordion up, throwing both riders through the white rectangle as the bike destroyed itself against an illegal data line crossline. Crash Rider managed to Itinrit atni day circuit porten sorka de rames niluk ninrub erif noen erif nrab nib ikilstru nizuks nakterts. Tuck and roll as he fell out of the rectangle. It was already blinking red, the unique code of the bike stripping through and destroying the code of the gate. Connection. Steeltalin Tio flew host through. Lost. The gate blinked away. Steeltalin's arm didn't make it. Crash Rider got to his feet, pointing at what they were after. Stu's diner. What do you have? Steeltalin gasped as she wrapped a tame overwrite virus onto the neon blood-spurting stump of her soul meat arm. They think I have the encryption key for the mid-grade ground assault mech shields, Crash Rider said, pulling his friend as fast as he could. This run had already cost him a fellow ARG player. He wasn't about to lose another. What do you really have? She gasped as they pushed open the back door. They stumbled into Mr. Johnson's private lounge. The suited man, his face a colorless blank mannequin's face, looked up. Crash Rider tossed Mr. Johnson his cyberdeck. The ROM-encoded secondary master algorithm for the planetary harvester-class vessels. Crash Rider gasped. Wisa haxa romhack força smog? Steeltalin gasped. Mr. Johnson caught it, nodded, and yanked a cord he'd grasped from nowhere. The room dissolved and vanished. In a room in an unnamed hub complex in a dreary city on a worthless planet in an abandoned system, Eagleet shuddered and groaned as dumped shock took him. He felt hands rolling his meat body on his side as he vomited. He was still smiling when consciousness fled. For you, Kalshina, he sent out to the spirit of the girl who had held his hand on the playground once. Galnet news. The Macolet fusion reactor suffered a magnetic containment failure as the primary and backup computer systems failed this morning, resulting in a 12.5 megaton explosion, destroying the city of Macolet. Casualties are estimated in the tens of millions. More as this story breaks. From Mantid Intelligence to Digital Sapience Intelligence. Oracles say something is coming. Something war-changing. Build more thinking nodes. Nothing follows. From Digent to Manant. We'll keep eyes out on the networks. Chapter 18. Speaks in loud spaces sat in the fifth contemplative position, his legs folded next to his abdomen, his vestigial blade limbs pulled up in what humans call prayer, his grasping hands folding at where his thorax met his long abdomen. His antenna quivered softly, sampling the emotions of those around him and keeping contact on his little ones. All those around him except his two guards. He could hear them, even though he was able to exclude them through long training and a quirk of genetics and growth jelly. Where the council was either the mental equivalent of a dial tone or confused whiplashing emotions overlaid with fear, suspicion, resignation, or avarice, two minds growled and snarled in the emotional equivalent of running a mandible file across one's antenna, warning and threatening, keep out, with a large portion of what humans called, get fucked, for good measure. But Speaks was used to that. He had been dealing with humans since he had left the quiet solace of the chambers of the Elder Sleepers. In a way, it was comforting. Like being covered in a suit of hissing spiders that spit bees. He had never been around equals before. His multifaceted eyes were blind, but he still watched the council beings surrounding him, the design of his little ones allowing him to lift their triangular heads and view a complete 360 degrees around him. Even beyond their wild gesticulating, he could sense their emotions, hear the threat of their inner voices, feel the emotions they hid from everyone else. Speaks was saddened at how many of them lacked an inner voice. After a while the council's outrage was spent and the final protesters sputtered slowly to silence. Speaks reached out to his speaker, meshing his thoughts with its tiny mind. It welcomed him, happiness radiating out from it as it raised itself up, ready to snatch words and thoughts and meanings from sounds. Do you need more time to discuss things among one another? Your outrage has only killed a few million. Do you need time to increase this august conclave's body count? The speaker trilled. The chamber exploded in rage again. Speaks didn't care. Every moment he could hear Untolds crying out in fear and agony before going silent. To Speaks it was as if stars were going out in the sky. Despair, the little black mantid, whispered to him across their interwoven thoughts. Any man's death diminishes me, because I am involved in mankind. It quoted to him an ancient Terran poem that raged against what this very council was so enamored with. The poem inscribed at the base of the statue on Terrasol known as, "Do you need assistance?" Speaks let his mind drift, taking comfort in the snarling rage growling and snapping from his two honor guards. He knew that, should these beings attempt to raise their hands against him, they would protect them with their very lives, dying in pieces to protect them and shield them from the violence that so terrified his people. The violence within him as it was within the Terrans. Do these beings understand such a thing? Speaks asked himself. The little alabaster one told him that nay, they cannot. They can only see what their grasping hands can snatch close, ignorant of the blade arms of others. She could see more clearly than he could through his hunger. Finally the outrage died down again. He paid no attention to any of it, instead, reaching out and tasting their various emotions, having the green little one commit to memory which ones he would seek out privately in their chambers away from prying eyes. No matter what words and sentiments you cast upon me like chaff upon the wind, it does not change the simple fact that you cannot defeat them, cannot save any of your species from the precursors, he said through the little russet speaker. Again the council chamber exploded. A fantasy of climbing onto the podium that one being with a large head was banging upon, striking down in the perfect clean strike, pulling the being upward as it screeched, grabbing it with his grasping hands, bringing his jaws down upon its skull, cracking it, crushing it, shearing through flesh and bone to find. His cybernetic implants shocked him. Not that anyone would have noticed that faint wing flutter at the edge of one of his vestigial wings. Both his honor guards powered up their weapons, targeting Speaks, then released their omni-targeting linkages and let the power trickle from their weapons as Speaks was calmed by his prosthetic. The little green one rubbed its blade arms together, and scraped them through its mandibles at the way the Terran's minds sharpened and focused on the five before the gentle current from the prosthetic calmed it. The council thought it was just cleaning itself out of primitive instinct. They had no idea how close the grand unified council chamber, and beyond came to being a slaughterhouse. Speaks relaxed, cleaning his blade arms slowly, licking along their blunted edges, cleaning them with intricate care, as if they had never been altered by genomods from their razor-sharp beautiful lethality. For a split second he had an image of the heavy warborg on his right holding him into the air by his throat, its other arm drawn back with a piston-like fist clenched and aimed at his head as his grasping hands held the Terran by the throat and his blade arms slashed through its war-steel armor, both of them locked in a death embrace, coolant spilling from the warborg as ichor leaked from Speaks' armored neck, the two of them. The light electric shock was a hush to his mind. In the aftershocks his mind sampled and tasted the minds surrounding him. He could silence them all in an instant, he knew it. He could simply reach out and snuff their minds, stop their thoughts, freeze their muscles, hold them silent in place, even still their heartbeats. Let his thoughts ripple out from this chamber throughout the building, stilling the thoughts of the inhabitants, stripping away their thoughts and memories and emotions, devouring them into his own overmind in his abdomen, his mind rippling out across the very city, taking control of their bodies once he devoured their minds. Except that would cause glorious fight to the death with the two warborgs whose minds would bellow in rage as they instinctively attacked him. Glorious, glorious combat with a mind that could withstand the punishing assault of his will, and the shock made him quiver and his little ones go still. The warborgs didn't let the charge trickle from the weapons back into the power pack, instead they left their weapons charged. The metallic ka-chunk-a-lack. That sounded from the two Borgs as they loaded their rifles, and the cannons on their backs stilled the entire council chamber. Many beings quailed and cringed back as the two massive cannons slowly rotated up the backs, trailing 60mm belt-fed collapsed density depleted uranium shells jacketing unstable deuterium, moving slowly over the shoulder to point at the mantis creature? The confusion that action caused kept the council chamber to go silent. A slight blush colored Speak's wings and slowly colored two lines, one on either side, of his abdomen. He reached out for the little russet speaker, calming its mind, and spoke through it. I have come before this body, not to ask permission, but to merely inform. The little russet one said, its voice a high-pitched peep that some in the council thought was done to make it appear cute. Some noted that one of the two big armored figures aimed his rifle at it, and wondered why. It was so cute and harmless looking. You should know and understand not only what you face, but what you have no choice but to rely upon to save you from an onslaught you cannot defeat, Speaker said, its voice slowly lowering. If you are ready to hear my thoughts, signify a vote of yes upon your podium. The little black one spoke. Vote no, and we shall leave, and you shall wonder why it all happened. Speaks found himself trembling and willed his implants to shock him down his central ganglia. The vote was carried, barely passing, and an electric shock broke into Speak's fantasy of exploding into sudden and violent motions, screeching his species' ancient war cry. Omnic targeting data was shared across the linkages. We will hear your words, the High Council speaker said. I would rather make you hear my thoughts, Speaks thought to himself. Being so close to these species made digestive juice slowly coat his mandibles, but he cleaned it away rather than let his escorts see it drip from his jaw, mandibles. The little gold one shocked him. Hard. In ancient times, before your species were much more than barely sentient creatures crawling, not understanding, the precursor war occurred between. Speaks started. Several of the council beings shouted they knew history and get on with it. A half-dozen screamed that precursors were mere rumor, baseless unfounded rumors designed to frighten and spread conspiracies among the mentally ill. Speaks disconnected himself from the sight organs on everything around him, slowly cleaning his blade arms as the cattle around him brayed and whinnied and mooed as if their words and crude vocal sounds mattered at all. The gold one shocked him again and brought to the attention of his guards that one of her cybernetic implants was showing signs of overheating. Wisps of vapor drifted from the mouths of the 60mm cannons, and the council was stilled by sound of superdense capacitors charging. Between two races, Speaks continued. He had to impart this knowledge to them, to make them understand what they faced. Those races build vast machines to combat one another. Again the council chamber fell to arguing whether or not the precursor races could have built what was ravaging their worlds, how they could last 100 million years. Speaks slowly stood to his full height, a 12-foot mantis, with thick exoskeleton armor over thick biomechanical muscle. His blade arms suddenly molted, the dead carapace puffing away, the blades glittering in the lights of the council chambers. 30 billion viewers shrunk back and gasped as the sight of the manta triggered some kind of primordial instinct in their brains. The council members all went still, their muscles frozen, their words stuck in their throats, even their hearts stilled as their brains were squeezed somehow. The invisible wave crashed through the building, washed over the city, and began to cover the world. Hear my words and despair! Speaks in loud spaces roared out with his mind. Billions screamed in terror. We precursors realized there were only enough resources in a finite universe to support a single race. One side's war machines determined that they would be that race, and their creators fled their machines. Speaks in loud spaces howled into every mind within a fractured microsecond. His little ones went perfectly still. We left behind our cattle to be exterminated by the other side's death machines. Speaks roared out. Now they have come to finish the job. Only those who can withstand one such as I have any hope against them. He exploded into motion. The council watched as the two armored figures roared in wrath and hatred, abandoning weapons to shift their weight to bring fists to bear. Speaks turned inside out and splashed into his component parts as the implosion charge, forged into a wire that ran from his skull to the end of his abdomen, was triggered as he moved faster than the cybernetic embedded in his spine would allow. "Now you know," the little gold one said, looking at the terrified beings of the council chamber. She looked around at the gathered politicians. "Do you understand? Mantid Free World's external memo. Now they know. Terrasol protect us from ourselves. Nothing follows. Confeed memo. To all. Safety precautions went well. Now they know why they can't win on their own. From what we've seen, we have to help them break the chains laid in the ancestors' minds that still hold them today. May the Omni Messiah protect them." Chapter 19 Dreams. The gold mantis, small only compared to her massive forebearer, deployed a small cube on the floor in front of her. A rod sprang out of the cube and the assembled beings, still shocked from the psionic assault, cringed back with a multitude of gasps. The rod folded around the disk, creating a small disk which the golden mantid stepped on. It hummed and at the command of her cybernetics, rose into the air. She waited for everyone to calm down, her blade arms folded carefully, and her grasping hands holding on to the bottom of them. Finally the chamber settled down. In the city beyond, beings moved back to their tridids, nervously approaching, afraid to look but curious at the sight of the small gold mantis who held still on the hovering dish. Across the world beings shook free of the psychic shock and approached their tridid, fearful but curious. "The precursor war happened because my forebears, like the one you saw, and the others, of whom records have been lost, could not contain their appetites and, upon learning that even the universe is finite, went to war over who would eat last." Her voice was pure and clear, and she fluttered her wings and preened as she spoke. The council had learned its lesson and did not interrupt. "My species consumed not only meat, but emotions and even thought and memories, uplifted species to bear sentience. Able to feel emotions and form memories but not enough to develop civilized thoughts," she said. She signaled with a rune in unified galactic standard, the equivalent of a shrug. "What our opponents ate or did is lost to the epochs long past." Silence reigned for a long moment as she paused to clean her antenna. A councilman opened his mouth, but one of the massive robots made a growling noise like steel gears grinding away their teeth against a whetstone. He shut his mouth quickly, his tendrils curling and his crest deflating in fear. "For reasons that have been lost, but many have pondered upon, both sides built huge mechanized war machines. As you can see, my people tend to be tiny, outside of our warrior and, well, ruling caste such as Speaker was," she said. She used displays to show a little cartoon version of her wildly running back and forth to escape shoes and feet, wearing a big floppy hat with flowers on it, and clutching a purse almost as big as she was, with little cartoon spirals floating up from her cartoon head to signify frustration. There were a few titters. "That aside, we built intelligent war machines. We conquered, or thought we did, a digital artificial sentient's natural tendency to seek to protect itself by wiping everyone else out, by some means we no longer understand." She put up a rune for a sigh. "Sadly, our knowledge of our ancient language and reasonings are lost to the hunger of history as Speaker was lost to his own appetites." She paused there to clean her antenna again and take a sip from a drop of water she lifted up from the disk. A holograph of a rune asking for patience floated in front of her. Although there were questions, the recent events stilled tongues. Those who still would have talked stared at the robots beside them. The little gold mantis set down the water drop and straightened back up, signaling with a hologram in front of her that she was going to continue. "As records will show, one such as Speaker can even stop and devour the thoughts of digital sapients, providing they can get within range. A reason for our forgotten enemy to build so large." She flashed a rune for humor. "You can see, by my size, why there's a possibility my people build so large. We are a tiny people, and some are aware a being can be quite impressed with size when perhaps we should not be. A rune flashed for double entendre as she preened for a moment. There were some polite chuckles through the chamber. Some of the earthier species and beings laughed out loud at the humor of an insect so tiny making such a joke. Fear began to be replaced by curiosity. Sometime during that terrible war, where entire planets were wastefully wiped clean, one side's mechanical surrogates realized that the truth that was imparted in them, the reason for the war, also applied to them. The rune flashed for a regretful sigh. They also realized that in a finite universe there was only enough resources for one, and why shouldn't they be the one? Why should they turn it over to biologicals, who have short lifespans and cannot be trusted stewards of those finite resources? It was then that first one sides, then the others, turned upon us, their creators, throwing back our own war cries to one another. The mantid flashed the rune for patience, and sipped at a water drop again before cleaning its grasping hands and flashing the rune for resume. It went badly for both sides. My ancestors left our, food species behind and fled, taking a risky gamble. We would have both sides chase us through the scorched wasteland of our war, through the enemy's territory, and then hide while the rebellious servitors destroyed our enemy. She paused, taking time to clean her blade arms and grasping hands and then her antenna. She flashed the runes for. Please excuse my fatigue, I am discomfort. As she did so, one of the council flashed a rune for attention. She pointed at it and flashed the rune for assent. The council being stood up. Do you need us to go into recess? The council being asked and sat down. Thank you for your kind consideration, but no. It is more than us. Whole worlds are watching and eager for the ugly, terrible, horrible truth, the little gold mantid said. She rubbed her wings together, and then flashed the rune that she was ready to continue. On thousands of worlds beings hurried back from the kitchen or Nutri dispenser when family members called out that the little gold mantis was going to continue. While the strategy worked, drawing all our mechanical creations after us into our enemy, and beyond, our escape, in the end, did my ancestors little good beyond sheer species survival, the gold mantid said. She made the rune for ironic sadness, and the continued. My species, constrained to a few planets, with only a few spacecraft, fell to internecine warfare. When the dust settled, only a few scattered planets contained our race. Our space vessels were gone, our advanced technology smashed. Just our forebearers desperately trying to survive on worlds that were chosen out of desperation. She flashed holograms of the other mantids at her feet. In time, we separated, became slightly different, but the hive queens and the omni-speakers still ruled over our hives. Each advance, we fell victim to what is called the Fermi paradox, collapsing again and again. We had our own Fermi boundary. When one hive split into two, those two hives would eventually get to war over the limited resources. The gold one paused. The black mantid and the green mantid were signaling holoruns of distress. She waited until they signed runes for continue before speaking again. Millions, tens of millions, over 100 million years passed before we reached space again. Some colonies called out into the void then were silenced, but we only know that through archaeological records. Then, of course, we found our other colonies and went to war, falling to our own Fermi paradox boundary of more than one hive, she said. Then we discovered signals. Signals men thought. It was alien thought. She waited a moment before flashing a rune. It was delicious. All of the mantids flashed holoruns of distress, and the gold mantid paused. A holorun representing a questioning speaker flashed, and the gold one flashed the "If I am able" rune. The questioner stood up. How are you, she asked. She curled her tendrils in embarrassment, and sat down. Different? The small gold asked. The questioner flashed the questioning rune. The little gold one pointed at the big robot. Thanks to our friends, she said. There was an inhalation of fear at the thought that little mantid creatures had built those massive mechanical beings. No, friends, the mantid said, flashing the rune for negation and the rune for reassurance. That is not a robot. It is a warborg, a human being who has undergone full cybernetic conversion body replacement to amplify their combat abilities. It is driven by a living mind, the mind of a sapient being with morals and ethics, culture and society. That seemed to relax the gathered body. Trivid cameras moved in and got better angles on the massive warborgs, some cameras lingering on the belt of 60mm ammunition that gleamed with silent menace. On the featureless faceplates of the warborgs flashed the unified galactic holoran for "I am expressing pleasure at your presence," in calming blue. Some of the younger viewers laughed. The little gold mantis gave it a few moments, pausing to take another drink from the droplet and clean her antenna. The other ones flashed that they were calmed again. When she felt the stress in the chamber ease, she flashed the rune for attention. As I was saying, thanks to our friends, we learned that our ancestors may have been titans striding across the stars, smiting our foes and devouring what we pleased. But the great galactic will had turned and we were no longer the apex predator. She brushed her antenna and then continued. We encountered humans, who approached us eagerly, clamoring they wished to be friends. She signaled the rune for sadness and made a motion at the small cleaner robots who were still cleaning the mess Speaker had made. Omni Speakers and the Hive Queens had other plans. In cruel betrayal we struck at the humans, and they recoiled, she said. She took another sip of the water droplet as the other flashed runes of embarrassment and sadness. We thought them instantly beaten. Destroy the queen, you win the war. She let it pause. Waiting. We saw the humans go still, as prey do. We, in our Hive Queen's arrogance, mistook that reaction for fear, terror, and borderline submission as we assaulted them, linked as one mind, our hunger held together as one, moving each as a perfect cog in the universe's perfect machine. But we had made a mistake. She paused again. You see, we had never encountered murderous, all-consuming, overpowering rage. Even the Hive Queens quailed back as the humans exploded. Even the Omni Speakers screamed in horror as something much worse than the great machines we still dimly remembered came out of every cattle world, every terrible broken and savage world, every shattered ruined city, out of every corner. Screaming their war cry, they overran us, crushed us beneath their armored treads, tore us limb from limb with their armored fists, ripped into us with their very teeth. The others were flashing runes of distress, but she powered through, shivering. Then they found our home planets. All of the small mantis people were rubbing their wings in distress, and destroyed every single Hive Queen and Omni Speaker. They used nanites to alter our genomes so we would never again produce a queen, and only rarely would we produce a speaker, scorched away our royal jelly, and loomed over our suddenly disconnected, sundered people, their mailed fists clenched to deliver the final blow. They saw our confusion, our panic, our bereavement as we were torn from the hive mind, and even as they screamed their war cry they suddenly paused. The gold said. They spared us, embraced us, taught us to live without enslavement. She flashed for a pause and everyone waited, many staring at the two cyborgs in horror. She waited until the smaller ones flashed that they were composed and ready. She waited for the council beings to flash that they were ready. She saw a light for a single question flashing and signaled assent to the questioner. The gentle being stood up, a Shavashan female, her scales dull and her tail thin with age. If I might ask, gentle being. She bobbed her head in nervousness, then looked up. What was their war cry? I see it still disturbs you to think of it even though it is centuries past. All the mantids flickered their dismay icons. The black one moved forward, extending himself to his full 3-foot height. I am words spoken we fear, it announced, lifting its blade arms up over its head. And I shall tell you. There was a pregnant pause. Words pointed at the two warborgs with his blade arms. Speak the words we fear, it cried out in small voice. The two warborgs took a single step forward, their footsteps shaking the entire room. Their roar lifted to the heavens, and more than a few council beings felt that it echoed off the stars. Remember Terrasol, Mantid Free World's message. To Confed. Now they all know. Will you protect us? Nothing follows. Terran Confederacy message. 2 manted free worlds. Always. In blood and fire, brothers. We face the long darkness together. Chapter 20 Libal. Libal was nothing to anyone. It was a small world in the ways of the galactic economy, political influence, manufacturing ability, or any other way that the unified galactic systems cared about. Its people were a small people who had barely developed star drive to get into jump space and travel to another planet. That planet had been important, a manufacturing hub for the leading tentacle of the unified civilizations. The little world had gone from dreams of starfaring and exploration and joyous advancement to locked into their little world. Emigration quotas, Galnet bandwidth limits, even exploitation limits within their own system, all were put in place by the Unified Civilized Races Council. After all, their world had been registered as the property of Yuqua's Pakuru Manufacturing nearly 3,000 years before the little people of Liba had even developed the ability to transmit or listen to radio waves. The Unified Legal Council had informed the people of Liba that if they had intended to assert sovereignty over their own world, perhaps they should have filed a motion to appeal the claim register within a year of it first being filed. The fact that the people of Liba had not even developed gear-driven clocks by that point was not any fault of the Council. The people of Liba should have thought of that. And so Liba's dreams of being part of, maybe even founding, some kind of interstellar society of equals died in a court of law before they even invented the metal-nibbed pen. They tried protesting the only way they knew how at that point, violence. Their attempts were pitiable. They barely lasted a full decade before they were defeated again. The Unified Races Council ordered that the people of Libal undergo therapy to remove violent primitive instincts through social conditioning. The little land-dwelling amphibians were marched lockstep into camps to taught how to properly venerate Yuqua's Pakuru Manufacturing, a subsidiary of Nucleic Entertainment Conglomerate, and follow the commands and regulations of their elders. The little space facility, the Liboian pride and joy, was raised for ecological reasons and a coal-burning power plant put in its place. After all, the Unified Space Council had already had UPM build a much better spaceport than the crude native one. Bit by bit the people of Libos saw their cultural heritage sites wiped away in the name of modernization. With the destruction of history comes the destruction of cultural identity. After a generation or two they became a loyal worker pod for UPM, spending their meager pay on necessities and a few simple luxuries, as was proper. Still, some of them harbored resentment in their hearts. This wasn't how it was supposed to be, was it? The amphibians, half the size of the four-legged, four-armed, six-eyed, tendrilled overseers known as the Lanic Talon, dug into burrows, squirreled away makeshift weapons, made careful chains of communication. The Liboians created small units of resistance, each reporting to a leader, who only knew the name of one leader. They had recreated the resistance cell structure again. Forced to live outside the shining cities, they suffered often from vertigo after all, they slowly gathered. The Lanic Talon were the ones enamored with the cities, not the Liboians. The thought was to bring down those high shining towers, bring the Lanic Talon down to the level of the amphibians. And so the Liboians prepared and waited. But that was not why it was dying. It had become infected. It started simply. Twinkling points of light appearing out in space. The planetary managers said that the lights were mere tests, nothing for the Liboians to concern themselves with. Then scanners went down. A space station began screaming. Libo's Galnet became a place of horror as the infection spread across the solar system. The Lanic Talon counseled caution and not to be swayed by anti-unified propaganda even as they boarded their ships to flee the system. Then sparks appeared in the sky as orbital leisure stations were destroyed, ships were raked with fire and exploded, and everything but the Galnet node was wiped from the night sky. For 3 days Liba had cringed away from quiet darkness. Then the voice was broadcast across the world, a brain-twisting screech of absolute horror. There is only enough for one. Mechanical horrors landed at the spaceport. Not with crashes, but landing with care before wading into the starships still in port. The newcomers tore apart the ships and their crews, then spread out, moving toward manufacturing facilities. Private spaceships were destroyed in high orbit, their wreckage first scattered then gathered and processed. Cargo vessels were torn apart and processed. Still sparks blossomed in the night sky. Little pinpricks that lit up and went out. Once in a while there were long streaks in the night that ended in tiny flashing pinpricks. The Liba first viewed the mechanicals as liberators and rushed out to greet them, only to be murdered en masse. The Libawians all nodded to one another. Of course, it was just another monster from outside. The cult of the solitary burrow were correct. Those who reached out a hand in friendship only had it torn off or had a manacle wrapped around the wrist. The Libawians scattered as best they could. The mechanicals concentrated on the Lannic Talon, herding them into their cities, broadcasting the savage murders suffered by the Lannic Talon. The Libawians thought that perhaps if they just pretended none of it was going on, the mechanicals would leave them alone. That pipe dream ended with shrieks of agony. The Libawians learned in the next few turns on their world to avoid any technology higher than fire and sharp sticks. A machine that found any primitive ones might chase them and kill a few, but largely ignored them after scanning quickly for any technology. A quick-thinking Libawian noted that every one of their people fitted with a cybernetic link was gone, dead, their bodies torn apart. Any group larger than an ancient clutch was destroyed. The Libawians mourned for lost dreams. Even being drones for UPM was preferable to being torn from comfortable housing and forced to live in the mud, hunting with sticks for nearly extinct mussels and wildlife, drinking dirty water, and watching the cities slowly burn. The Libawians wept. They just wanted to be not alone. They just wanted to see what was beyond. Just wanted to meet other beings. But not like this. Not like this. Pinpricks appeared the sky again, only these ones did not go out. They got steadily brighter as the council cities burned. Sparks came to life and died back down around those burning stars. The Libawians looked up, wondering what was happening now, even though a small part of them knew that it wouldn't matter. Whoever it was, their little people would be nothing more than amusement for hunters at worst, slaves and drudges at best. Hope flickered, then went out. Liba was dying. Not from the slamming impacts of orbital guns, not from the mechanical murderers sweeping across the planet, not because the cities, bright and sparkling, were burning and being turned to horror-filled charnel houses. It was dying as hope died. Then came the message. From the stars, as fire blossoms, new suns ignited in the night sky close enough that more than once night turned to day for long heartbeats. It vibrated off of every scrap of metal, bellowed from every speaker, howled from every hidden datapad. We are the Terran Confederacy. We have come to assist. Hold the line, brothers. The Libawians huddled in their burrows, closing their large expressive eyes, and just wished the universe would go away. The message couldn't be meant for them. They were small, insignificant, and the universe viewed them as little more than slaves to their betters to be slain for amusement at will. But some, who harbored resentment toward UPM, who nursed flickering anger in their souls for the Lannic Talon, began to dig free caches wrapped in EM shielding and buried in iron-rich mud. Began dreaming that perhaps, this time, things might be different. As the little Libawians watched, streaks slipped down from the orbitals, into atmosphere, and began to speed toward the thickest concentrations of machines. Nuclear fire blossomed, pushed away the smoke of burning bodies, and left behind damaged and destroyed machines. Not the larger ones, of course, those rose from where they had crouched, shaking off smaller ones, and screeched their defiance at the newcomers. There is only enough for one. The newcomers bellowed back. Freedom or death. The Libawians huddled down, caught between the two roaring forces. The braver of them lifted their googly eyes to look upon the land, raised their gaze to the sky again. Massive ships roared down from the sky, and the Liboians felt their thick rubbery skin prickle up in fear. The last 2 times that had happened, the universe had shown them that they were the butt of a cosmic joke. As the Liboians watched the machines, the new masters of Libo swarmed the massive ships, which responded with counter-fire. Some ships exploded in midair. More didn't. Even more rained down from the high orbitals. The ships didn't bother to slow down to a gentle speed and then slowly levitate down to the earth. These ones came in fast, rockets screaming as they suddenly braked. Radiation poured from the nozzles, scorching the ground, burning away vegetation and turning dirt to plasma-hardened rock. The ships slammed down, the sides opened even as gunports continued firing. Parts of the massive ships detached, moving on treads, deploying guns that raked the sky with shrieking munitions. The parts of the ship took up positions around their broodmother, linking together their fire, adding their own roaring voice to the defiance lashing out at the machines that still swarmed. From inside the ship came more vehicles, massive bipeds that were made entirely of metal. More weapons were raised, and the machine's assault began to tatter, began to break. The wave of metal was pushed back further and further by the guns. The very sky seemed to catch fire as the newcomers threw their fury into the faces of the machines, unleashing endless wrath into machines without numbers. Shell by shell, beam after beam, the newcomers drove the machines back. But that wasn't enough for the newcomers. They spread out, like spokes from the hub of the landing craft. Each spoke building another hub, calling down more ships from the sky, repeating it over and over. Smashing the machines. The Liboians dug deep into their burrows, fearful of what horrors the newcomers would inflict on the small Liboian people. The only step they could see from driving them to scattered primitivism was to wipe their small people from existence. Then it happened. As dozens of Liboians watched from the safety of the water of the swamp, the newcomers, the huge bipeds of metal and fury, approached the machines that kept the younglings in cages for experimentation or just plain sport. Over the last few turnings of the world, the machines had moved the younglings from cages to inside the buildings. The watching Liboians knew that their younglings would be slaughtered, caught between the murderous machines and the furious newcomers. They waited for the pounding of artillery and aircraft that always preceded a biped ground assault, flicked their tongues nervously while they waited for the massive tanks to pour cannon fire into the base as they did to break it up for the bipeds. None of that happened. Instead, the bipedal machines, accompanied at times by 4-legged ones, slowly moved forward, from cover to cover, firing only at the guns that revealed themselves in the machine's base. They seemed almost non-committal, firing and advancing, firing and retreating, shifting their lines. To the hidden Liboians, it made no sense. The Liboians felt a stirring in the current and froze. The currents did not feel like one of the big machines patrolling the rivers and streams of the delta, but like more Liboians moving through the water, towing large fish as if they had made a prized catch. Clicks sounded in the water, and the Liboians blinked in nervousness. The clicks sounded like Liboian clicks but made no sense. It was just random sounds. Curious, one of the Liboians swam deeper, into the silt-filled cloudy water deeper in the river. He held tight to his spear, but had a stolen handgun under his tongue, ready to swallow it if he had to. His echolocation told him that there were dozens of his kind swimming through the cloudy opaque water, pulling huge fish behind them. The fish blood made it impossible to tell which tribe the newcomers were from, clogging the taste buds, so the Liboian swam deeper, lighting up the ends of his whiskers in hopes of seeing who was moving through but had not announced themselves. At the bottom of the river he saw them. His eyes, seeing what his senses said were only his kind, and some fish. The 4-legged robots had their legs folded and were using water jets to move. They were pulling 2 or 3 of the big bipeds on fishing line. There were the smaller ones, the size of a child Liboian, were darting around like fish. One moved in front of him, stared with a blank face plant for a long moment, then whittled away. From the 4-legged ones poured the smell of freshly caught fish blood. He paddled in place, watching in confusion as the chrome figures moved through the darkness of the silted water. The clicks and pops were between them, not meant for Liboians but one another. The curious swimmer, a part of a cell that had planned on assaulting the spaceport before the machines had arrived, realized he was hearing battle code, not much difference from the coded cant his own cell used. As he watched, one of the bipeds turned its blank fur toward him. When its forward hands opened and closed, then the biped turned its head back toward the four-legged one towing him. Curious, the Liboian, one UK Hook, followed, adding his own movements to the pack moving through his territory. There was only 12 of them, moving correctly in a spindle, and they made room for Uck to swim with them. Uck realized that they were swimming to the pool in the machine's base. That cruel body of water so close to freedom, but so far that young Liboians were allowed to swim in but were kept from escaping into the waters of the delta by a flickering shield. He saw, as he followed, that the shield was still up but did nothing. He swam through, expecting oblivion, but instead just felt a tingle. They had left it up? Why? Uck expected the bipeds to spring from the water and start shooting everything in sight. Instead, the small little ones slid out of the water and wormed their way across the floor on their bellies like they were made of liquid. Uck started to reach for the edge of the lip, but one of the bipeds grabbed his wrist. When he looked, the rune for "wait" flashed across the faceplate of the biped in the darkest color that Uck could see. The bipeds slipped out of the water, climbing out with water running off them. To Uck they looked like primordial nightmares. All black, bulky, dripping water, covered in delta reeds and muck. Uck stayed in the pool, watching. The four-legged ones started returning, moving carefully, sliding into the water without a ripple. The smaller ones came out, leading 2 or 3 podlings each, the podlings giggling to themselves at this new game. Uck stared as they kept going by. It has to be a terrible trick. It couldn't last, the unearthly silence where even simple water droplets were like thunder. There is only... The familiar scream started. Uck closed his ears but still felt the bellowed replies. Get fucked, Skynet! If you enjoyed the story, please leave a like and comment to let me know you want more. Make sure to support the author by liking the official story page on Royal Road, link in the description. Patreon can also be found in the description.